Hello and welcome. I'm Joel Weber, the editor of Bloomberg Businessweek, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the inaugural Bloomberg Businessweek event, where we'll be bringing the magazine to life through a week-long program. Over the next 5 days, we'll explore the how-tos of business, finance, technology, politics, culture, creativity, and entertainment. The ideas will also fill the pages of the magazine, offering a window into the journey as we go to press. We're going to give you a ton of information to help you get smarter, invest wisely, travel safely, eat well, stay calm, make better cocktails, and maybe even fall in love. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping announcements. First of all, I would like to acknowledge our solutions sponsor, Deloitte. Our presenting sponsor, InterSystems. And our supporting sponsor, Indiana Economic Development Corporation. If you have issues with audio or video quality, try to refresh your browser or use the chat box in the bottom right corner of your screen for support. You will be able to submit questions throughout today's event. To do so, just click open the white tab on the right-hand side of the video window and enter your question. And remember to hit us up on social using the hashtag #TheBusinessWeek and engage with other attendees in the event chat in the bottom right corner of your screen. Now, on to the first segment of the day, the cover trail. One of the things I enjoy most about being editor of Bloomberg Businessweek is getting to make our covers, which are known for being bold, funny, and irreverent. Readers also love the cover trail, found on the table of contents, where we take you behind the scenes of our creative process. Here's a glimpse of some past covers that never made it out of cover trail. Today, for the first time ever, you get to be part of our creative process and will help us choose the cover. We've narrowed it down to 2 options for this week's how-to issue, and we're going to present both to you in a battle royale, one from the edit team and one from the art team. Then you'll share your thoughts in the event chat at the bottom right corner of your screen. At the end of today's program, we'll announce the winner. So let's get started. Please welcome my colleagues. Joining me on the edit team is editor Brett Began, the mastermind of the how-to issue. And facing off against us on the art team, creative director Chris Nacenzo and photo director Ariel Brown. Let the battle begin. Brett, we made a cover all by ourselves.
We did. So even if we lose, I think it's pretty amazing that we were able to design a cover as the words people and not the art people.
Yeah.
So
how did you want to approach this?
Yeah, so we haven't done as a magazine how-to issue in 8 years, since 2013. So I felt like we wanted to pretty quickly introduce the concept to readers who may not remember that issue from 8 years ago, as memorable as it was. So the thinking was maybe let's try as a special issue to front load some of this content, right? And make it clear that whereas you see our cover week in and week out, and it generally will play off something in the news either that week or a longer term project, this is really different. This is not that. This is a totally different thing. So I think we wanted to signal really quickly to the reader, hey, this is different, it's special, take a look.
And what's inside? How much how-to do we have in here?
A lot. We have a lot of content. I think in the magazine it's 40 some odd pages of content. And a lot of it, I think, will be on familiar terrain for the reader. For instance, we lead off on our cover with how to make smarter investments.
That seems important. We can. That's a hard sell.
Yeah,
we can lead with that.
And that seems like a thing that people would come to us for. But one of the really fun things here is that there is also a lot of content that may seem like a standard deviation away from what we normally do, but actually does sync up.
Yeah. So one of the things I think about when we make covers is sort of this magic that comes between edit and art and photo, all sort of working in harmony. But I have to say, I mean, we worked so hard as editors on this. Like, I think it's most important that we lead with like what you're going to get when you get in this issue, and there's no better way to do that than just words, right?
Right, and how-to as a concept is somewhat vague, right? I mean, you could do a how-to really at any magazine, right? So how does our how-to differ from any other how-to that you'd find somewhere else?
We can make this very clear. Words.
Just words and then more words on top of those words. Yeah. At least that was our strategy.
I think there's some other fun things here. We rarely play with the logo, you know, so I think it was interesting that we got to do that and tie it to this event with the highlighting of week, the word week in there. Right. So, you know, it's a special issue. I think ours is very iconic. You know, one of the things I think about with covers in general is we want you to see this thing and, you know, you understand it within about 2 or 3 seconds. Right. And the magic is that you can actually, often with a good cover, you will remember it for years to come. And that's what I think we've accomplished with ours. So Chris, Ariel, what do you think of our cover?
It's okay, I guess. I think, like, you know, when we approach covers, you know, we really, it's like kind of what you're saying, like you want someone to be able to read it really quickly. And I think, like, you know, our job is to communicate something, you know, not just like with directness, but, you know, that's memorable and feels like something new. And you really want to distinguish yourself with that. And a lot of times that means like how we approach photo and words and how those come together. I don't know, how do you feel like we approach photo, Ariel?
Yeah, I mean, I think in maybe the whole history of magazine making, the only words cover that has ever been memorable is "God is Dead" by Time. So I think that says a lot for the power of pictures and visuals and how that works to sort of create an iconic, memorable, you know, stop you in your tracks kind of cover and curiosity gap. And that's definitely what we try and do when we're commissioning photographs and, you know, really trying to tell a whole story in one image, which I think we actually do with this cover that we made, Chris.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, like, you know, Brett and Joel, you guys are like, okay, we want to get all these different aspects into the cover because there's a lot in the issue. And we were like, okay, how can we do that with a visual? And so, you know, we really wanted to find a way to show that. And obviously, it would be a person with 8 arms. And we also had this really unique visual approach to the issue, which was like, yeah, really beautiful. And like we used it throughout the photography in the magazine.
Yeah, for the whole issue, we basically wanted to really get back to this DIY kind of ethos of, you know, since we're telling you how to do things, we wanted to empower you to actually go out and do them. And so looked at this thing called the Whole Earth Catalog, which is from the 60s and 70s. And, you know, really kind of like earth arty. We wanted it to feel as though like everybody on the art department after we closed this issue walked off and made some earth art in the desert. And while this is a little more glam version of that, also intentional, you know, we still wanted to really get at kind of like the DIY kind of aspect. So we gave her 8 arms, trying to do a bunch of things all at once, succeeding at them, you know, tequila making, investing on the terminal, you know, learning how to be the world's best boss and really put it all out there with one image that, you know, you get it right away. Supersedes the words, which are there as backup scaffolding. But I think, you know, the woman really says it all, even with her vaccine card and her soccer team that's about to take off any moment. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you guys think, Joel and Brett?
Words as scaffolding. That's
I can't believe
funny.
You called us scaffolding. I'm still trying to process that.
I think the main piece of constructive criticism I would put out there is seem to be 6 arms too many.
Right, we're a news magazine, Joel. We strive for accuracy.
You both know that. I mean,
6
we do
arms,
this week in, week out.
Too many.
Yeah. So I just think that realistically, people aren't gonna vote for you when they see an 8-armed monster. Maybe you should add like a 9th arm to say, here's an arm to grab you and vote for it. But I think again, like, we made a pretty clear case that the words are where the action is here.
Well, I would say, like 8 arms is great. 9 arms will be better. Fortunately, we know how to use Photoshop, so we can take advantage of that. And, like superheroes, they sell a lot of movie tickets. I'm sure they'll sell a lot of magazines. So I don't know. I feel like this is a really good option.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll agree to disagree. I do like how you snuck the terminal in there. That was clever, though.
Yeah. There's a lot to like about your cover as well. And one of the things that I think about, and I think, Joel, you think about too, and we're doing covers like this, is if this is a franchise, right, a thing that we're going to repeat year in, year out, do we need to have some kind of consistent visual language around the concept? We do the Heist issue every year. We do the Bloomberg 50 every year. There are certain consistencies there to sort of remind readers, oh, this thing, I'm used to this, I like this. And I'd just be curious for Ariel and Chris, like whether you felt like that needed to play in at all.
Ariel, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if there's anything we've learned, next year is next year. But in 2013, all the portraits that we shot were on kind of a blue background, and so the blue is kind of referencing subtly back to what we've done in the past. But I think design does a lot of work basically with these special issues to tie them all together from year to year. Photo really just kind of makes a really amazing photograph, and we're able to kind of back off a little bit from so much pressure of year to year serialization of it. And I think this cover absolutely does that.
Yeah, I would say, speaking of design, like ours has like a lot of this sort of visual hierarchy, right? You get the cover like line really big, and like the other sort of elements are a little smaller. And that kind of like, go big or go home attitude, I think really makes ours such a better cover. Whereas you guys are kind of like in this, medium kind of territory where everything's sort of like kind of a flat layer. So I don't know. I feel like it's a no-brainer right here.
I think they're saying that we aspire for mediocrity.
Flat.
We could just make some of these words be bigger.
Let's just bump up the
get in Microsoft Word, go up to like 72 or down to 48.
If that's all it takes, we can do that as soon as we're done.
I mean, we can tinker some more.
I'm fine with that.
But maybe we should just let our audience decide, right? We've done our heavy lift. They've done their heavy lift. They maybe use some photography and design things that are beyond our capabilities.
Yeah.
We have a saw for how to build a bike shed. I think that's really important.
And a cheeseburger.
And a cheeseburger. What's not to love about a cheeseburger? Right. So we'll let the audience decide.
Okay.
So again, thank you all for joining us today. It's an honor to be here. And remember to enter your thoughts on our covers in the right corner of the screen. And we'll take this to a vote and decide which cover we're going to use at the end of the day. Now, please stick around for Mr. Jay Leno.
There are about 1.4 billion cars in the world. And at first glance, it seems like a pretty healthy chunk of them belong to Jay Leno. But how does someone go about collecting classic cars? Who do you call? How much should you pay? Is it a good investment? Well, I went to Jay's garage in Burbank, California to find out how to collect cars. So Jay,
this is the garage.
It's incredible. You've bought a few cars in your time.
Yeah, I just never sell anything.
So talk me through your process. I mean, everyone I know just goes and bring a trailer and drools over cars.
Yeah.
Is that what you're doing too, or?
Well, it is the more money than brains club. And
okay.
when you buy a car, it's a rational process made irrationally. You need a car, but you really don't need that. If you get in a Miata, you go, this is all anybody needs. It's got a convertible, it's a 5 speeds, it's a stick shift, It's zippy, as my mom would say. It's fun to drive. It's comfortable, heater, air conditioning. That's really all you need.
Sure.
Why you need this.
Then we have this.
Then you get into the art of it and why you like it. You know, a lot of people say it's a terrible investment, classic cars. I heard from Chank O'Leary, you know, Mr. Wonderful, talking about, oh, he collects wine. That seems ridiculous to me, wine. Yeah. But cars, it's kinetic artwork, like the Lamborghini Miura. These are now worth minimum $1 million. This one I essentially got for free. I got it in the early 80s. Dean Martin bought it new.
Okay.
His son cracked the crankcase, engine seat, you know, just...
It was rough.
It was rough. And back in those days, when you had an Italian car like this, you had to know someone in Italy who spoke Italian. You couldn't just call the factory and order parts.
How did you find out about this car?
A buddy of mine bought it. He was a teacher, and he thought and it just got to be too much. And the wife said, things sit in the yard, give it to Leno, you know, so it was one of those deals. See, it costs just as much to restore and repair a valuable car as it does a worthless car.
Yeah.
So you might as well start with something valuable.
Can we talk about this car?
Yeah, this is a good example.
Okay,
this is a 1962 Maserati.
Gorgeous.
This car I found, there was engine problems and transmission problems, and it was sitting at a repair shop for a long, long time, and they just wanted to get rid of it. I think it was $25,000. This was
wow.
This was 15 years ago, and we took it, brought it back here. We just needed to do the engine and the transmission and some other work to it, and now it's fine. And now it's probably a $300,000 car. There are a lot of cars that were ahead of their time, in their time. They were just a little too expensive, or for some reason they didn't sell. I mean, the classic example would be the McLaren F1 over there. When that came out, it was about $1 million, and people thought, $1 million for a car, that's the most ridiculous, because Lamborghinis were $100,000. Then the recession hit. They were going to make 300 of those. They built 64, couldn't sell them. The company shut down. There are only 64. They can't make any more, so the price of it went up.
Yeah.
You know, it's as simple. It's really the basic supply and demand.
When you go to look at a car, are you one of these guys who are bringing magnets, you know, to feel underneath
Well, here's
the
the
car?
thing. The stuff I'm looking for, there aren't any. So if you find even the pieces of one, you buy them. Next door, I have a Doble steam car. They only built 40 of them. I have 2 of them. Okay, if you find one, it doesn't matter what condition it's in, just buy it. Yeah. Because you're not going to find another one.
Are you scared to drive this now because it's worth so much?
No, I mean, I drive it like a regular car. I mean, I drive it carefully. I don't park it down. You don't give it to a valet. Yeah. You don't park it in downtown LA.
How closely do you pay attention to mileage or to factory original?
I never look at mileage.
Okay.
You know, I meet guys all the time that I've got a Ferrari Enzo. I've had it 15 years. It's got 9 miles on it. Well,
oh boy.
That's in worse shape than a car that's being driven regularly. So something that has normal mileage. These are mechanical things. You know, oil is blood, and they need to circulate. It needs to keep the car running. So high mileage doesn't interest me.
Okay, so what's the appeal with the Corvair?
Well, the Corvair is an interesting choice because you can buy them for a couple of hundred, even maybe a few $1,000s. It's air-cooled, it's rear engine, like a Porsche. There's no radiator. I find them fascinating. You know, Ralph Nader went after the Corvair in his book, and it got some bad press. And so consequently, the value of them went down. But they have a hardcore bunch of fans that love these things. And this one here is a Corvair. A guy named Don Yanko, who was sort of the Carroll Shelby of Chevrolet.
I see this.
Yeah, he bought 100 of these. They gave him his own serial numbers, and he went racing, and he beat Porsche in 1966 for the championships with these Corvairs.
Did you have this car in mind? You were looking for it specifically?
I was looking for a Yanko Stingray.
Okay. Yeah. So how did you, without divulging all of your secrets, how did you find it?
I found it because you call the Corvair Club and see who has one. Anybody want to sell?
Oh.
Okay, and then people contact you.
It's easy.
And they say, yeah, this is what I want for it. You know, that's a little high, but this one was very good. It's very clean. It's nicely done. I said, okay, so I bought it from him.
Wow.
You know, whatever kind of car you're interested in, there's a club of that car. And you go on the website, and there's always an elderly person who'd been in the club for 15 or 20 years. They can't drive anymore. They'd like to sell their car. You might pay a little more, but you get a car that's been maintained and exercised properly, and that type of thing. I have a car called a Tatra. It's Czechoslovakian. So one day I see a magazine, Tatra Club, Litchfield, England, or something. Okay. So I call it Tatra Club. Well, we have a Christmas party every year, of course. We all get together for that. I said, well, I joined the, oh, good, this is $80 a year, blah, 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 blah. So I said to him, well, that sounds good. I said, how many people at the club? Including you? 4. Well, now I was the 4th guy. There's only 3 other guys. I go, what kind of Christmas party is that really? Just you and the other 3 guys, now me.
Yeah. How are you on space?
Well, there's 140,000 square feet here. That should be enough.
Okay, you can wedge a few more in.
Yeah.
Plus the motorcycles.
Yeah, now that one's interesting.
This one.
Well, this one has a jet engine.
What is it like to ride?
Well, I mean, you can hear it's a jet. It's... And then it kicks in. But it's fast.
Wow. I would imagine. How many of these did they make?
I don't know. I think they built about a half a dozen of those.
Okay.
Pretty rare.
Okay, tell me about the art of the deal. Are you a low ball offer kind of guy?
No.
Okay, walk me through this.
That. The people I buy cars from are more concerned that the car is maintained, that it's not flipped. If the car is what they say it is, I usually pay the price.
Really? You don't try to negotiate?
No, because I'm not trying to get, I'll say, look, I'll pay your price. Just tell me what's wrong with it. Okay, this needs to be in this. Okay, and then I make a judgment whether I want it or not. And all of this making money from cars is fairly new. The real trick is, if you buy something you like and it goes up in value, great. If it goes down in value, you aren't going to sell it anyway. It's cheaper than hookers and cocaine. Yeah. Plus, your wife always knows when you come home reeking of transmission fluid.
Yes, she knows where you've been.
No, exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
I get it.
Are you ready for faster and more accurate insights? Introducing Adaptive Analytics, the newest product in the InterSystems Iris lineup. Adaptive Analytics provides a powerful array of self-service data discovery and analytics capabilities, and it integrates seamlessly with the technology you're already using. Adaptive Analytics finally makes it possible for IT to provide businesses with all of the data they need in real time, and to more easily get accurate answers and predictions. Get Adaptive Analytics and give business managers the tools to access the data they need when they need it. InterSystems.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Lichtenberg, Global Head of Product and Industry Initiatives here at InterSystems, and I'm delighted to be joined today by one of our longtime customers, Cam Mingus. Hi, Cam.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Great. Cam, let's start out today by having you tell us a little bit about your company, if you would.
Sure. I am the president of Financial First Credit Union located here in Indianapolis, Indiana. We serve over 80,000 members and have over $800 million in assets. And being a credit union, our credit unions were founded on one simple philosophy, and that's people helping people. And our credit union does this in 3 different ways. One is that we support our military, we help feed the hungry, and we provide financial education to anyone that wants it. And at the end of the day, we feel that this is who we are and this is what we believe. Because we believe if we can help improve the life of one member, that member can help their family, and that family can help their community, and the community can change the world. So we start with one member at a time.
Wow, that's beautiful. Obviously the pandemic has been affecting all of us in so many different ways. Can you tell us about what this has meant for your company and for your members and the kinds of challenges that you were looking to address?
Absolutely. First, we started with implementing practices and protocols that kept our employees and our members safe. We got as many of our employees to work remotely so that they could go home and take care of their families. But, the biggest challenge that we had is when we had to close our lobbies. And I remember a conversation I had with Kevin Ryan, our current CEO, who's retiring at the end of this year. He said to me, Cam, there's no better time to be a credit union, he said. And you know what? That was our call to action. So we asked ourselves one question: what do our members need most? And the answer was they need quicker access to their money and they need peace of mind. So we weren't concerned about hitting our sales and production goals. We were concerned about our members. And we focused on answering those two questions about helping our members get quicker access to the money and help them gain peace of mind. And so we developed an initiative called We Care. And through that initiative, we called as many members as we could just to check in and see how they were doing. Through our predictive analytics platform built on InterSystems Analytics Framework, we were able to identify members through utilizing technologies such as artificial intelligence. And through that, we were able to identify members who might be struggling. And the main focus was that we wanted to call our members before that situation became at a crossroad. And finally, we empowered our employees to make decisions so that the members wouldn't have to wait to hear back on a decision.
That really is a wonderful mission, Cam. And I must say it's heartwarming to hear about an organization that really works hard to make life better for its members. Can you tell us a little bit about the results that you're seeing so far from your We Care initiative?
Well, last year we had our best lending year ever. But, more than that, we helped 3,000 members defer their payments. We helped 3,500 members refinance their loans. And, and it all goes back to that basic philosophy, Joe, that I talked about earlier, people helping people. And that's who we are, and that's what we did.
Really amazing. It would be interesting. Can you talk maybe specifically about how you were able to make all of this happen?
Well, we utilize the InterSystems Analytics technologies. That for us is really our analytics ecosystem. And our analytics strategy is built on three things: data, insight, and action. And utilizing InterSystems technology such as artificial intelligence, we're able to build out operational, transactional, and demographic and risk matrix. And the real benefit, as I see it, Joe, is that we don't have to navigate between multiple sets of technology and systems. We can all do it all through one integrated environment.
Wow. Thanks, Cam. So you've really been a terrific partner to InterSystems over all these years. Do you have any parting words or advice for our viewers?
I do. We had this saying here that facts are stubborn things. So I would say this: listen to what your data is telling you. Listen to what your members are telling you. Empower your teams to make decisions and focus on the experience. And if you do those things well, the numbers will take care of itself.
Well said, indeed. Well, thank you, Cam, and thanks everyone for watching. And if you'd like more information, you can, of course, visit fcfcu.com and intersystems.com. Thank you.
Hello, I am Brooke Sutherland. I cover the industrial sector for Bloomberg Opinion, and I am joined today by Scott Kirby, CEO of United Airlines. Thanks so much for being with us today, Scott.
Glad to be here, Brooke. Thanks for having me.
So the first thing I wanted to ask you about is you came out in December and committed to going 100% green by 2050. What does that mean exactly?
Well, at United, we did commit to going 100% green, despite being an industry that is hard to decarbonize in aviation. And for us, the 100% green is different than the 100% net zero that you might have seen from other airlines or other companies. And what really makes it different is we have committed to getting to 100% green without using traditional carbon offsets. And so I'm sure we'll talk about it more today. But we're focused on sustainable aviation fuels, new research and development, things like electric aircraft, and in particular, carbon sequestration, which I think is going to have to be a big part of the answer, not just for aviation, but for all the hard to decarbonize industries around the globe.
Let's drill down a little bit more into carbon offsets, because you've been very vocal about this, calling it greenwashing, criticizing some of the companies that rely on this. And, sustainability pledges are very in vogue right now, but a lot of companies do use carbon offsets. So Why do you think that this is not the path to sustainability? What are the flaws with carbon offsets in your mind?
Well, first, if you go look into the projects, one, it's really hard to do. They're very opaque, or very non-transparent, and very hard to find what the projects are. And the reason is because a lot of the projects aren't really real. There are things that were going to happen anyway. And so the incremental impact on carbon is zero. But even for those that are real, and there are some that are real, even for those that are real, the real challenge we have globally is that mankind produces 4,000 times as many emissions as we did in the pre-industrial era. And most of these carbon offset projects are about planting trees. There's not room on the planet to plant 4,000 times as many trees. It simply can't be the answer. And the problem with it is it's the easy solution. It's the solution that if you're sitting in the C-suite, you can write a check and check the box and have a marketing message that I've offset all my carbon, but you really haven't done anything. And if corporations continue to all rely on carbon offsets as the way to solve the problem, then as a globe, we will not solve the problem. We have to move on to the harder solutions. There are real solutions. They're harder, unfortunately, than just a traditional carbon offset. That's why I'm so passionate about making sure that we try to get the message out that focusing on real solutions is the only way we're going to actually solve this problem.
And you're also putting your money where your mouth is. I mean, you've made pretty significant investments in things like sustainable aviation fuel and carbon sequestration. Can you talk a little bit about what United is doing on those fronts?
Yeah, we have made significant investments. And that's part of what we've realized is we can't rely on others to do the hard work for us. And we can't wait for sustainable aviation fuel to be developed. We have to be a part of actually driving the change. And so at United, we've represented over 50% of the global aviation's commitment to sustainable aviation fuels. And that's because we've been investing in companies and providing them seed capital so they can complete the R&D and commercialize the technology, because there's a lot of different feedstocks we're going to need in order to ever actually make sustainable aviation fuel big enough that it can really make a difference. And so we're investing there. We're also proud to be a partner with Occidental and 1.5 in what will be the world's largest direct air capture and sequestration project. It's another one of these projects that today the economics don't really work. But the way you get them to be commercially and economically viable is you've got to start the investment process. You got to get through the R&D. You got to figure out how to drive economies of scale. And so we're focused on particularly sustainable fuels, sequestration, and then also electrification of aircraft. That's not going to go all the way. There's a very definite limits on how far we can go there. But we're focused on trying to make investments early in those companies to drive the technology and the economies of scale so that down the road, those things can make an actual real difference in decarbonizing aviation.
The other thing that I think is just so interesting is that you came out with these commitments in the middle of a pandemic. That's been the absolute worst crisis that the airline industry has ever seen. So it would have been very easy for you to say this is a problem for another day. Why did you not do that? Why come out with these aggressive commitments in the year 2020?
Well, look, it start with say, you can probably tell it's a personal passion of mine and something that I've been passionate about since I was in college. And it's also the biggest issue that faces our generation. The consequences of climate change are potentially catastrophic. And if you're a geek like I am and into the science of it, there's these just catastrophic tipping points that we could hit that are almost impossible to come back from if we hit them and come back. And so we have to solve this problem. And the other thing is we went through the pandemic, as difficult as that was for aviation and for United Airlines. It is impossible to have gone through the pandemic and to pretend that we are not part of a global community. And anything that happens anywhere in the world affects all of us everywhere in the world. And COVID demonstrated that. And climate change is the poster child for we are all globally connected. And if anything, it increased the importance of solving those big global problems. And so, it if anything, did double down on our commitment that we already had to really make a difference in this area.
It also seems to have changed the focus for investors, because you are seeing so many more investors investing in the ESG sector, prioritizing that for the companies that they hold stakes in. What have been your conversations with investors? About these sustainability initiatives? Are they excited to see you doing this? Do you hope this is a model for other airlines in the sector?
Yeah, I read a lot about ESG and how important it is to investors. But I must admit, I have not heard from one investor about it as a driving factor in their investment. That said, I hear from a huge number of employees and customers in particular who are really proud of what we're doing at United for sustainability and also for a lot of our diversity efforts, which is not what we're talking about today. But those are the kinds of things that I'm confident are starting to change the image, the perception, the brand of United Airlines. And they're going to have a big payback for shareholders, not from the ESG accounting, but because United is becoming a company that more and more people recognize stands for something that's bigger than just being an airline. And we've realized that in a whole bunch of other areas. Like, we're part of the humanitarian response around the globe. And today we're carrying 150,000 pounds of medical equipment to India and bringing 1,200 U.S. citizens home from India, the only U.S. airline that flies there. That kind of ability to make a difference that's much bigger than just being an airline, is going to be one of the enduring changes on the other side of the pandemic for us.
Well, and I guess that's really the crux of ESG, is that it's just good business to make some of these changes. So I do want to ask you a little bit about the pandemic, because, of course, unfortunately, we're still dealing with this. What are you seeing right now on the recovery front? Any progress, any positive signs that you're excited about?
Well, we're certainly seeing progress, and we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But it's a little ways to go before we're all the way through the tunnel. At United, you can think of our business as divided into they're not exactly equal, but close to 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. A third domestic leisure travel, a third domestic business travel, and 1/3 long-haul international. That domestic leisure travel is more than 100% recovered. It indicates the desire of people to unite with each other and to reconnect. And people are out in droves. The airports are crowded now. They're crowded all with people traveling on leisure travel, though. That domestic business travel is still down, call it 75 to 80%. Most people are not in offices. While I was in the office for a few days this week, I'm back at home today. And until offices reopen, my guess is that's going to stay down. Our best guess on business travel really kind of hitting the point where it starts to recover is probably in September. Schools will be back. I think schools are going to be open across the country. The announcement from the CDC on not requiring masks for people that are vaccinated is a really big deal to be back in office buildings, office towers. And I've found, because I have been traveling for business, once you get on your first trip, like, you realize how much you missed it and how impersonal and how much you miss trying to do things virtually. And so I'm pretty confident that business travel is going to start to come back in earnest in around September. And then for us, the other third is international borders. And as long as international borders are closed, essentially long-haul international travel is going to be shut down. That may take a little longer, but it will ultimately happen, and we will get the borders open. So really good progress on recovery, really good indications of human nature with people wanting to get back and reconnect as soon as they can. So really encouraging, but we're not quite out of the tunnel yet because business demand and international is still closed.
On the business travel front, I mean, there's a lot of people out there who are predicting the demise of business travel and portions are never going to come back. And you've been more optimistic about this. And personally, I have to say, I kind of tend to agree with you. I'm excited to be back in the office and excited to go see people. But I'd love to know what's driving your optimism. And are you hearing things from your clients that makes you say, this is going to come back stronger than people expect?
So we had a big discussion about it. This was over a year, in April of last year, in the depths of the crisis. And, we had a view that human nature is what drives business travel. Business travel is about relationships. It's not about transactions. And nothing about the pandemic was going to change the need to connect and be with people, to go out after a business meeting, to have dinner, to have drinks, to get to know them personally, to talk about their kids and all their personal experiences. That's how you build relationships. And that's what matters. And that's what business travel is about. So we were unique. We were the only kind of big airline in the Western world, at least, that did not permanently ground big chunks of our aircraft fleet, all on an expectation that business travel would come back. And today I feel even more confident about that. I'll tell you one good anecdote that I like, which is one of our biggest corporate traveling customers. I talked to their CEO in May of last year. And that CEO told me, you've got to start preparing for your business to be off by 50%, because I know we're one of your biggest customers. We're going to permanently reduce travel by 50%. This Zoom stuff works great. we're going to reduce. I then talked to that same CEO in the fall of last year, and they told me, well, we've realized we've got to go out and see our clients just as much as we did before, but we're not going to do all those internal meetings where we celebrate, the best salespeople and all that kind of stuff. We don't need to do that anymore. So we'll probably be down 25%. I talked to them earlier this year, and they said, oh my God, we've tried to hire all these new people. They can't fit into our culture. We're losing the cultural connectivity. The first year back, we're going to have to travel more than we did in 2019. And that's just the evolution with that one person. And my guess is that if I went back and said, do you remember what you told me in May of last year? They wouldn't remember. But what is happening is people are realizing, this doesn't work. And particularly once they get out and travel, that person is traveling again. Once they get out and travel, like there's a flip and, the switch flips in your brain and you realize it's not the same. And you've got to be back connecting with people and uniting. And so we were confident before, and I'm even more confident today.
No, it's almost like we were all way more enamored of Zoom when it was sort of a novelty, and now 14 plus months into this pandemic, it's less enticing than it once was.
I've started joking that the 3 worst words and most common words I hear are "you're on mute."
Absolutely, or your camera's not on, one of the two. On the international front, it seems like there's still so much uncertainty about what exactly you're going to need to do to get into Europe, if you can go to the UK, what that looks like. Well, the one question I had for you is, are we too far down the booking curve at this point for you to really, even if we did see a grand reopening, for you to adjust and respond to that? Has it, the people who would have taken those international trips already booked elsewhere?
Yeah. So for places that are willing to reopen without quarantine requirements, there's massive demand. And so in Europe, Greece, Iceland, and Croatia have opened, and we have huge demand. We keep adding more flights. We're going to add, I don't know if we've added them yet or if they're coming next week. We're adding more capacity in those markets because there's so much demand to go. And by the way, the Kirby family, my wife and all 7 kids are going to Croatia this summer because it's open.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
That'll be a boom to tourism.
It's what?
It'll be a boom to tourism.
Yeah, it will.
Yeah.
That's a big group. But we see that happening across the board. My guess is for the rest of Europe, we're getting to the point where maybe we could be open for August and have a month or 2 at the end of the summer. But it's probably really next year at this point before the recovery happens. And we're hopeful that places like Australia and New Zealand might open in time for the U.S. winter, the summer down there. And Asia is probably a little further away. But we're probably getting close to the point where we're too late in the booking curve for the rest of Europe to make a meaningful difference. But we're keeping our fingers crossed that perhaps we can get the UK open in time to have some business in August. And I think there'll be a huge rush of demand. If the UK would open up and make the US green, I think there'd be a huge amount of people rushing to head over there at the end of the summer.
On the topic of rushing, we did get inflation numbers recently, and airfares were up about 10%. And, I anecdotally tried to book a trip home to Kansas, and my jaw hit the floor a little bit when I saw those prices. So, as you're starting to be able to take some yield again, are you in a big rush to add seats to meet that demand? Or are you kind of happy with maybe, selling seats at more profitable levels for a little bit after what you went through as an airline?
Yeah. Well, while airfares were up a lot in the inflation report, they're still down 15% compared to where they were in 2019. So we have a long way to go. And again, going back to the business demand and leisure demand, there's a lot of leisure demand, and so we are adding seats, but we're not back to 100% because if you look at 2/3 of our business, a third of it being business demand and a third of it being long haul international, are down 80%. So it's hard to kind of do the math, even though leisure demand has recovered to more than 100% for an airline like United, a big global airline like United. And we're the biggest global airline in the United States, and we carry more business traffic than others. We're not going to be back to 100% until those two components come back in full.
Understood. As you look out on the other end of this pandemic, we did also have some new airlines come out, sort of taking advantage of cheap aircraft prices to launch. What does the competitive landscape look like? Does that get tougher as you come out of the other side of this? Do you see enough demand that everybody can sort of take their share? Well,
I do think the competitive landscape is going to be harder in the future for a lot of airlines. For one thing, in past downturns, whether they were from a recession or a fuel price spike, what typically happened was airlines like United would shrink. And one of the Wall Street analysts wrote about this, that the big airlines would push back from the table and leave the scraps for all the startups. And I can tell you at United Airlines, we're going to do the opposite. We've grown confident in the plan that we had before the pandemic. The growth was working, and the huge turnaround that we've had in customer sentiment, brand affinity for United Airlines as we've gone through the pandemic, and all the things that we've done have left us with more confidence that coming back and actually growing our market share. So unlike past downturns when United was shrinking, would have shrunk and sacrificed market share to startups, at least speaking for United Airlines, we're going to grow and expect to increase our market share on the other side of the pandemic.
You talked earlier about how you didn't ground that many aircraft permanently, but you also held on to, at least a decent chunk of your labor force, thanks to the government aid that let you do that. So as we hear all these reports about labor shortages in other corners of the economy, are you running into that problem at all, or do you feel like you have the people you need to meet this resurgence in demand?
For the most part, we don't have labor shortages. We kept all of our employees, as you talked about, on board. We did a industry one of its kind deal with our pilots, not only to keep them, but to keep them all in the correct seat, so that even though they weren't flying a lot during the pandemic, they were ready to come back at 100% when the bounce back occurred. But we do have pockets of places where we're having a hard time, and a lot of our partners, even if you go to an airport, while airports are full, you'll see a lot of restaurants that are closed. Part of that is they're having a hard time hiring. So a lot of the infrastructure around airports, even if they're not direct airline employees, is having a hard time hiring right now, and that is beginning to create issues, and I think it'll create more issues as we get through the summer. TSA being able to hire, as an example.
Oh, sure. Long lines.
The numbers are going to be way higher. The numbers are going to be way higher this summer. And the other thing is, you just everyone gets used to operating at these lower levels. And even though we're still below where we were in 2019, it's a pretty big increase, kind of each month getting bigger and bigger. So I expect there'll be some strains in certain places, though it's mostly not United Airlines employees that will have hard.
No, that's definitely true. You do get used to different operating environments. Certainly, me walking around on the streets of New York, it was nice when it was not quite as crowded. Although it's better for the economy that it's coming back. You sort of hinted at this earlier, but you are also making a big push on diversity, and you had an announcement with JP Morgan around pilot hiring, and I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about that and why this was an important initiative for you to start.
Yeah, so I think it is really important. And you hear a lot of talk in corporate America and a lot of nice statements about diversity, but not nearly enough action. And if I rewind the clock, 5 or 6 years to Ferguson, when Ferguson happened, Missouri, the statements sound very much the same as they did 5 or 6 years ago. And those of us in corporate America need to give people opportunity. And my focus for diversity is creating opportunity. And the reality is everyone does not have the same equal opportunity at some of the great careers that are available today. And so what we did with Aviate is we're the only U.S. airline that has our own pilot training academy. And today, only 19% of our pilots are women and people of color. And so I'm pretty sure that, by the way, is the highest of any airline in the country. It's a disproportionately white male industry for a lot of historical reasons, coming out of the military, and particularly because there's a huge barrier to entry. If you're not in the military, you've got to spend $150,000 out of your own pocket to get enough hours and training to get certified. So what we're doing is creating our own training. Yeah, and very few people can afford to do that, of course. We're creating our own training academy, and we're going to be able to access a much bigger reservoir of talent. They, of course, they go to the training academy. They have to do all the same hours, certification, and just like other people historically have washed out of pilot training, many of them will as well, I'm sure. That's just what happens. But they'll have all the same rigorous standards. But what we're doing is giving them a chance to get the training and then access to that career field. And 50% of our pilots that go through that academy, which is about 500 a year, we expect to be women or people of color. And we're really proud that we're doing something that is an active action to make a difference with a real goal And what we're doing is just giving people opportunity. We get them in the door. They got to win. They got to succeed or fail on their own. But we're going to give them a chance to get that first rung of the ladder and have their shot.
And are you also partnering with people to take that first step of getting them in the door? I mean, in terms of actually attracting people to the field of being a pilot?
We are. We've got a number of partnerships. So with historical, HBCUs, historical black colleges and universities, a number of women in aviation, Hispanic in aviation programs like that are already in communities, and it can help find great people. But you take HBCUs as an example. This is not just people that are interested in aviation. This is a career field that was never even an option. They don't know anybody that's a commercial airline pilot. It's never even occurred to them that it was an option. They don't know how to become a pilot. We can now go, to Elizabeth State University and, talk about this wonderful career field, and then we can pick the best of the best. Given the number of applications we have, getting into the United Aviate Academy is going to be more selective than getting into an Ivy League school. The percentage of applicants that succeed, because we have so many great applicants. And what that tells you is we're going to have this huge pool of great people, and we can pick great people to give them their chance to go to the academy, and then they'll go through the training, and they again have to succeed on their own and pass all the certification and safety standards. But just this huge pool of talent that was never available to us because it just wasn't an option for them.
Well, it's great to hear you're getting so many applications. And honestly, I am fascinated that you're the only major airline with a flight school, because pre-pandemic, you heard quite a lot about pilot shortages and concerns about filling these roles. And so, do you feel like this gives you an edge in terms of, not having that problem down the road and being able to get everyone you need to on a global scale?
Well, it's less about giving us an edge. I think it will, but it's more about doing the right thing. And the reality is some of these pilots go to this training academy, there's a possibility they wind up working at another airline. But my guess is that most of them will wind up working for United. They'll have loyalty to United, frankly. We're going to be the ones that are working hard to give them a chance. We believe in them. And I think we'll have a committed, dedicated workforce. We also get the opportunity in training academy, instead of just being about flight training, it'll be about all of that, but also to start, with the cultural values that we want to really drive at United about taking care of the customers and doing the right thing. And it just kind of all hangs together. We're doing the right thing with Aviate. We're asking them to do the right thing for customers. And so I think it'll help mostly in the fact that we'll have, a workforce that believes in the company, that believes in the mission, that knows we stand for something that's more than just being an airline. And they believe in it with all their hearts.
Which also connects back to what you were saying around sustainability too. So just to wrap it all up, it's been about a year for you in the CEO seat, and what a year it has been. But if you had to sort of sum up your key lessons, what would they be?
Well, it has been quite a year, and what I think happened in the year was at United we have managed to accomplish a decade's worth of work in a single year. And I realized going through the year that my job, I think, is mostly about inspiring our workforce and making them proud. That's my main job. And this was an opportunity, as hard as it was, to do that, because in a crisis, is the opportunity to set yourself apart. And the people of United have done that. And if I can inspire them and create an environment that they're proud of, the 100,000 people of United are going to figure out all the great things to do for customers and to make this the best airline in the world. And so my lesson has really been, my job is simple, it's focused, inspire people and make them proud.
Great. Well, this was wonderful. Thank you again for taking the time. And, maybe in 6 months, we'll do this in person. So
I look forward to it, Brooke. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.
I think under normal circumstances, it definitely would be a really wild leap of faith.
I'm Laura. I'm a writer and editor in Los Angeles. So back in March of 2020, I was kind of in an influx period. I'd actually made a resolution to stop using social media. So, did what everyone else did, went back on Instagram. Took me like a couple weeks probably, but I did re-download Tinder. You know, it was really like the first night that I downloaded it, and it took me not that long, a couple swipes, and saw Anthony's profile.
My part of the story starts a little bit earlier. I was living in Beijing at the time, decided to go on a little holiday for Chinese New Year, and the last day kind of had a really weird feel at work. Everybody was talking about this weird virus. I expected it to just be a normal trip, and on my way back, I realized that the school I worked for wasn't going to be open anymore. So I had this really good idea to just kind of extend my vacation a little bit. 2 days before my flight back to Beijing, the Chinese government had closed the borders. So I was without a job, and I was living at my parents' house, and I thought this is a great time to try to pick up some chicks. After a couple of matches, I ended up seeing this girl, Laura, who just seemed really intelligent and really funny and a little weird, and definitely out of my league, and she liked me, so I thought this must have been a mistake or a catfish or something.
We matched pretty quickly. He sent me a first message that evening, and we just had a really good back and forth. We sent like text paragraphs and blocks of conversation, which I enjoyed a lot.
I sent her a couple of messages, and she responded really quickly with some really funny answers, and it probably took about 10 minutes before, and maybe 3 or 4 messages before I realized, like, oh my gosh, she's awesome.
So, you know, more became a little bit more, and every single day we were talking, and, you know, decided that this was going well, let's jump on the phone. Had kind of like a quick introductory phone call. Well, it was like 2 hours, so it wasn't that quick. And then a couple days later, second phone call, we actually lasted for 6 hours.
We were both convinced that the other person would freak out and think like, you know, if they saw us in Zoom mode, but that definitely worked out too.
So after a couple months, you know, we really never talked about like if we're going to meet. We always couched it in like when we're going to meet. We just didn't really know what the logistics were. In July, LA was pretty bad. By the end of that month, we just decided like, you know, waiting didn't make any sense. So how do we figure out how to be together? And then he got in a car and drove 2,600 something miles and showed up on my doorstep. I saw you walking up the stairs, and like, I mean, first it was just relief, like, okay, like, all right, I don't have to deal with anything unexpected, like nothing has gone wrong. It was just immediately like relief and happiness, and
just natural, just felt natural.
Yeah, every time that we're apart for a couple hours, like, I'm just so happy to come home to you, and you know, just glad that we, like, everything from like fancy going out in as much as you can in COVID to just like being in pajamas in the morning and like hanging out, like it's all great and it's all
easy.
Right?
Yeah, it's all just really easy. Yeah, open it up, let people swipe wherever they want to swipe. You never know who's in Bangladesh just waiting for your call. I don't know. You can answer.
If you can really cultivate communication and you really feel like you found someone that you're safe to talk to, safe to be yourself around, you know, it's not a thing that I would have gone to if I felt like this wasn't a person that I was so connected to and like could say anything to, and you know, like any concerns, any weirdnesses that came up, like I had a safe place to address. So I think, you know, having the foundation of communication, I think, is the most important thing that you can do that precedes any kind of leap of faith, and it really is supportive of anything like crazy that you might end up doing.
Yeah, I think, you know, it depends on who the person is. You know, some people I would give advice saying, make sure that they're the person that you're talking to and that they have teeth, you know, but there are so many things that we talk ourselves out of that could end up being incredible and changing your life for the better. Life's too short, you just gotta take a chance every once in a while. Works out.
Welcome. I'd like to greet everyone here. We're continuing talking to one of the people whom I really enjoy speaking with, and I know you're going to as well. Our guest today is a very difficult person to sort of characterize, in part because he's worn so many hats and he's done them all very, very well. You probably have talked a lot about the notion of pivoting during a career and being good at everything you do. And I think today's guest, Boris Jordan, has shown that. He's got a very unusual background simply because of the number of things that he's done over time. He's been a banker at First Boston in Moscow. He's been the man who was heavily responsible for the privatization of many, many state-owned enterprises in Russia. He has also been one of the key leaders who was responsible for the sort of growth of the modern stock market in Russia. He also is, co-founder of Renaissance Capital. He's the head of Renaissance Insurance, which is a major insurer in Russia. And he is also the sort of executive chairman of Curaleaf, which is the largest cannabis company in the U.S. And he's also become a voice for the industry and a person, sort of the go-to person that people turn to when they want to know what's going on in that business, what about the prospects of that business, and what are some of the stumbles ahead. And so I'm really happy to have him here today for all of that, but also because he's extremely articulate in talking about what's facing the industries that he participates in, and he's just a very good interview. So, Mr. Jordan, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Jim. What a
okay.
Nobody's ever given me an introduction like that, so I appreciate it.
That could either be good or bad. I'll take it as good, though. Well, I want to start with sort of a scene setter. I understand that maybe 5 years ago, looking at where cannabis is today would have seemed like a stretch. But right now, it is a vibrant, really exciting, fast-growing industry that has won surprisingly widespread acceptance over the last 5 years. When you look at where the business is now than when you first decided to invest in it back in 2014, are you surprised at how far we've come?
Jim, actually, it's very interesting that you start with that because it's maybe the only issue in the United States today that has bipartisan support, if you can believe it. And that, look, almost every ballot initiative that's happened in every state around the country, the cannabis legislation is passed with an overwhelming majority of both Republicans and Democrats. Today, it polls at over 93% for medical cannabis and 76% for adult use recreational cannabis. So it's something that the country is very much united on, but still it's certainly a industry which still causes a lot of distress and I would say debate and anxiety in Washington, D.C.
Now, were you, when you first became involved in investing in this business, it wasn't the same environment. Were you, just, convinced that it was a time had come for cannabis?
Yeah, I think, Jim, what I did was I looked around and I saw that cannabis, did some research, and I saw that cannabis has been used by people for over 1,000 years. They found cannabis in Egyptian tombs. We know it was used by American Indians for medical purposes. It was obviously very widely used at the turn of the last century, early 1900s in the U.S. until it was made illegal. And then, of course, we all remember probably the 1960s and 70s when cannabis was very widely used. And so I knew that there was natural pent-up demand. According to U.S. statistics, U.S. government DEA statistics, the illicit market in the United States was over $100 billion. And so I realized that as these states would legalize, that our job, what we were doing, is we were taking customers that were using cannabis and buying it illegally, probably in many cases unsafe product, and we were going to move them from that market to the legal market where product is tested and regulated and is legal to be used. And so I believed in the fact that people would rather buy something legal than illegal and safer rather than unsafe. And to be honest, that thesis has been correctly because the growth has been astronomical in the sector across the board.
Now, the growth has been astronomical, but there have been plenty of hurdles from sort of a government and regulatory side. I mean, one of the things that's really marked this business is the fact that it has succeeded despite a lot of obstacles from regulators and state governments and federal law. I mean, one of the problems with sort of legitimizing and sort of bringing it on what had been a controlled substance for a long time is that a lot of the laws don't allow for the typical business practices, things like being able to go out and get a bank loan, things like be able to sort of do adequate credit, do financing. Now, a lot of that still work still needs to be done right, and is the change in administration in Washington going to make that an easier pull?
So, Jim, it's incredible how difficult it is to operate in this sector. Not only everything you mentioned, you can't get a bank loan, young people that are working in the sector, operating on grow facilities or in laboratories, are having their bank accounts closed. People making, $50,000 a year are having their Chase Manhattan or Citibank's accounts closed because they're working in cannabis. This is the largest job creator in the United States at the moment. And we pay an effective tax rate of 55%. We are classified as more dangerous than cocaine under U.S. regulatory rules at the FDA and the DEA. So it's incredible that cannabis is still in that category at the federal level, but yet at the state levels, they're approving it. They're allowing more and more innovation in products we're building, and the industry's turning profitable, even in a situation where both hands are tied behind their back. There's lots of we can't trade on U.S. exchanges, and Canadian cannabis companies, Jim, can trade on U.S. exchanges, and U.S. cannabis companies, the ones that actually hire U.S. employees that create jobs in the United States, invest in the United States, cannot trade on U.S. exchanges. It's an absolute travesty. I've never seen anything like this happen in the United States before, where our own businesses are discriminated against other foreign companies. Colombian companies can trade in the U.S. European companies can trade in the U.S. Canadian companies doing cannabis can trade in the U.S. But U.S. companies that operate in our market cannot trade in the U.S. and cannot raise capital on U.S. exchanges from U.S. investors for our industry. So it's a very difficult industry to operate. But despite all of that, the customers are coming faster and faster in more quantities, and our companies continuing to build out across the board, and the industry continues to develop in spite of all of those restrictions put onto us by the federal government today.
Given that there's a lot of preference by consumers for this to become legal and this to become an established product category, do you think that that's going to help push along some legislation in Congress? I mean, right now, the SAFE Act that would allow, at least a more level playing field when it comes to, banking and financing for this industry.
Yes, I think there's certainly pressure on Congress now to start moving legislation. At the moment, the House of Representatives has now passed safe banking 3 times and passed the MORE Act, which is the more broader legalization once. The problem has been historically in the Senate and the administration. Under McConnell, he would not allow any cannabis legislation to get to even committee. So he halted it back. Now that we have a democratically controlled Senate, certainly Senator Schumer has been playing lip service to the fact that he wants to pass comprehensive cannabis legislation and is working on some legislation. But he has stalled the safe banking legislation because he says it doesn't go far enough. What he wants to do is he wants to do something more comprehensive. Now, although on the one hand, we support what he is doing, on the other hand, we could use any help at the moment from the federal government to at least lift some of the tax burden and some of the restrictions to bring the cost of capital down. One of the big issues facing this industry is the issue of social justice, the inequities, which obviously were there for minority communities that were hurt very badly by the war on drugs. We are 100% supportive by these initiatives, but you can't help those communities and you can't help finance these groups if your cost of capital is 15% and if you have to pay a tax rate of 55%. And so the first step, in our opinion, is you've got to get this banking legislation through, and you can also pass comprehensive, but my worry is I worry that they don't have the votes from the Republicans to pass the more comprehensive legislation. And so let's see my vote. I believe in Schumer. I think he He knows obviously the Senate better than I do. He knows what he can do, he can't do. He's put his reputation on the line by saying he's going to get this done. We're all anticipating. I can tell you the community is behind him on trying to get this legislation passed.
Now, we've gotten, because there is, sort of no federal law that allows this industry to operate across states, we've ended up with a lot of different state regulations and problems that a lot of businesses don't have, which is the ability to, sort of trade, or do trade in one state, but not be able to cross borders, not be able to transport, product across the state lines. Now, that's caused this sort of craziness about how do you, build a national business? How do you build an integral business when you've got to basically do market by market? That's a very large challenge, right, for the growth of this industry?
It's the cost, for instance, if you look at Europe today, which is a few years behind us in the United States, they do allow you, for instance, to manufacture and grow in Portugal and then sell to Germany, England, other countries within Europe. In the United States, we're not allowed to. We have to be fully vertical in each state. So in other words, we have to grow in that state, we have to manufacture in that state, we have to sell and distribute in that state, and we cannot cross lines. We can't even move money across state lines. That would be illegal under federal law today. So there is an enormous amount of impediments for this industry in the current structure today. And obviously this industry will be much more efficient than it is today once those impediments go away. The only other industry in the United States that I know that operates under a similar, except that it is allowed to raise money in the U.S. and allowed to use banks, is gambling. The gambling industry in the United States is not federal. You're not allowed to move across state lines with gambling. You're only allowed to do it in the specific states, and you're only allowed to have licenses from those states. And so that's why there was an initiative years ago to form something called the States Act and pass it through Congress, which would allow the federal government, in effect, would say, you states can determine your own rules and regulations for cannabis. However, we will allow banking and banking services for employees and customers and supply chain, all these things to be allowed, as well as listing. But that didn't go forward at this point in time. And so the industry continues to develop. We continue to build. We're working with Washington as much as we can. At least in my case, me and Curaleaf, who are the leaders in the industry, are leading the way in Washington to try to see if we can get comprehensive legislation passed. But for the time being, we're still waiting for that law to be issued or to be drafted and submitted to the Senate by Senator Schumer, Senator Wyden, and Senator Booker. We're all waiting for it in great anticipation. And it's not only the companies that are waiting for it. It's the consumers that are waiting for it because prices will come down. It's the disenfranchised communities that are waiting for it because then they can get involved in the business. So everyone is waiting for some sort of legislation in this area because 80% of the U.S. population today, Jim, has access to one form or another of cannabis, whether it be medical or whether it be adult use. And the federal government is way behind the population on this issue.
Now, you mentioned, that things are happening here, but they're also happening overseas. I know that, that is, for most businesses, something that they've done after they developed a sort of a national business here. This is unusual simply because of all the impediments here. I know you've been taking action to expand Curaleaf's, footprint outside the U.S. I mean, so why is that, and what are you doing?
Well, Curaleaf today is the largest operator globally, not only in the United States, but also in Europe now, by revenue, by market cap, by all categories in the cannabis world. And obviously, we're developing our brands and our technologies here. But for instance, Europe is actually a market that potentially is twice the size of the United States, given the size of the European Union and the size of the European economy. And it's also a community that uses cannabis. The estimates of the illicit market there are over $200 billion. If you take on some of the countries around Europe, for instance, Israel, Eastern Europe, Ukraine, other countries that are moving in the direction of legalization now. So Curaleaf decided that it wanted to have a foothold in the European markets. And so we made an acquisition there. We bought the largest European vertically integrated company a couple of months back, and we're now starting to move our brands and some of our technologies to Europe. But also the European market is much more deep in on the medical research. For instance, only today, the DEA came out and said they're going to start granting research licenses in the United States after many, many years of holding it back. They said they're finally going to start granting research licenses. Well, in Europe, they've been granting those licenses for 10 years. And Curaleaf, through this acquisitions, now has access to a lot of the research and development that's been done in Europe on working with the cannabis plant and the various cannabinoids on the various medicinal properties that these plants have. And so that was also an IP acquisition for Curaleaf.
Now, you have a very large medical marijuana business. I am curious, long term, do you see the company sort of trying to strike some sort of a balance, or is there a preferred mix between medical and long-term adult use?
Yeah, I think there's going to be three categories as far as the medical, as far as the plant is concerned. I think there will be the high-grade pharmaceutical, the medical side of it, which will largely be synthetic forms of cannabis as they're developed. I think then there'll be the nutraceutical products, like what Curaleaf does today. And then there'll be the adult use. So Curaleaf is really focusing on today the wellness and nutraceutical side under Curaleaf's brand and the adult use side under our Select brand. The medical side, which I think will be largely dominated by the pharma companies, will really be driven by synthetic cannabis because they need a very stable supply chain. It's difficult to work with biologicals, even though a lot of European and Asian countries are moving in the direction of moving away from synthetics into biological medicines. The United States, for the most part today, is very much still a synthetic medical market. And so it is more likely that the U.S. cannabis market will develop along synthetic lines. Now, we are looking at that part of the market, but there still hasn't been enough money invested in the development of synthetics to be actually able to create a supply chain so we could formulate the medicines required. So today we work with the biological form of the plant, and we do formulate the medicines using the plant at the time. But that, as we all know, is not as perfect as having a synthetic supply chain.
Now, nutraceuticals, do you think that how big a future is there for cannabis as, let's say, an ingredient in millions of like beverages, things that people often might not think of as a use for that?
So if you think about it today, and we just addressed for a second the U.S. market, I'm not talking about the whole world. The traditional cannabis market in the U.S., the traditional user is about $100 billion. But that's not even talking about all the new users that are coming in. So, for instance, the pandemic was an enormous boost to the cannabis industry because a lot of people, particularly elderly, started to use cannabis for sleep, for anxiety, and other things. For instance, my 80-year-old in-laws started to use, they were having problems sleeping during the pandemic. They're both over 80 years old, and they got a medical card in New York, and they started using different products to help them sleep. And they've said that those have been incredibly useful for them. And we're seeing a new customer starting to come in. We're seeing a lot of women coming in using cannabis products, drinks products to substitute alcohol from a calorie perspective. And as many people know, cannabis seems to be healthier then. It's interesting, tax revenues in Illinois, in Colorado, and other states that have recently gone adult use, alcohol sales are down substantially, cannabis sales are up, and tax revenues from cannabis sales are higher than they are from alcohol sales. And this is a tendency, and that's why you've seen the big alcohol companies embrace cannabis and start to lobby for the legalization of cannabis because they're seeing it as a disruptive threat to the alcohol business in the United States.
When you're relegated to operating within states that allow cannabis sales, whether they're medical, whether they're adult use, how difficult is it to actually develop, sort of a branded strategy? I say that because I know that, your brand has been very successful. I'm just wondering, is that as large a challenge as I think it is?
Yes, it's very difficult because the reason Curaleaf went so wide as quickly as we did, we operate in 23 states and 8 countries in Europe right now, was because I realized that you cannot build a national brand unless you have a national footprint. And so Curaleaf today, it's hard to imagine, we're going to sell, $1.3 billion of cannabis products in the United States alone this year. And that's before any acquisitions that we're going to do. So it's an industry, and that is double from what we did last year of, call it $650 million of revenues last year. And so you need a national footprint to be able to build these brands, but it's very difficult. So for instance, a national launch of a brand, in every state there are different packaging rules, what you can put on packaging, how you have to disclose it, what you have to disclose. And so it's very hard and very inefficient to launch a national product when in every state your packaging may have to be different. And that's why we need federal law and federal regulation for these products, so it will be more efficient for us to be able to distribute. But you know what? We are still operating within what we have today. The companies are growing. Yes, it's more difficult, but it just shows you that even with all of these restrictions on the sector, the consumer wants this product, and the sector, because of that, is supplying these products, and the sector is growing at over 100% annual growth rates.
Now, investors have, sort of been excited about cannabis companies at times. They've been sort of worried about prospects of cannabis companies at times. After the election, they were excited again. And you see this sort of waxing and waning. I mean, what do you think that, what do you think they're looking at now? Particularly, are they sort of waiting to hear what happens from the Biden administration, or is there some other shoe that investors might be waiting on in the sector?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is the biggest issue right now facing the investment community is understanding the difference between the Canadian companies that trade in the U.S. and the U.S. companies that trade in Canada. So the Canadian companies that trade in the U.S. are largely small businesses with significant losses because they operate in a market that's the size of one of our states in the United States. The U.S. companies, what they're called is the MSOs, the multi-state operators, of which Curaleaf is the largest, they trade in Canada today. And there's the Canadian exchange we trade on. It's a very small exchange. We don't even trade on the TSX. We trade on something called the CSE. It's called the Canadian Stock Exchange. It's not even their NASDAQ. It's a very small regional exchange where all the U.S. companies tend to trade. But these are companies with significant market caps. You're talking $5, $10 billion market caps today. But the investors today, what they really need is they need safe harbor legislation. So if you want large investors in this country, they need safe harbor legislation. So one, they can make the investment. Two, the big custodians, whether it be JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Bank of New York, can actually custody the stock. The biggest impediment today is the fact that they can't even custody these shares in their banks because the federal government has no legislation. The federal government hasn't had any enforcement actions against anyone, but you know as well as I do, after 2008 and the mortgage crisis and all the fines the banks paid there, they don't want to breach any rules. So they're living by the strict rule. There is no legislation around cannabis, so we can't custody these products. But the federal government hasn't given them any guidance. And so we're hoping under the Biden administration soon, we'll either get legislation or at least some guidance from the Department of Justice and the Treasury about how the banks can treat the sector. And hopefully we get some good news on that within the next several months.
Now, from your early days working in what was essentially an emerging market in Russia to this emerging industry, I mean, do you like to take the sort of, let's just say, the more difficult path, going at a business that isn't established and sort of finding your way there, as opposed to, sort of doing something where all the rules are already laid out?
Well, when I went to Russia, I was a young kid, and I just got out of university. I went to NYU, and then I worked at Kidder Peabody for a few years, and then I went off to Europe and Russia to tackle that emerging market. So I didn't really do much thinking back then about what I was doing. But one thing I learned in that market was that if you have high barriers to entry and you have scalable opportunities like Russia was at that time, and the barriers to entry was that nobody knew anything about it. It was a new emerging market, but it had all these natural resources, and obviously it was going to be a winner, that it was an interesting market to investors. So I worked with people like George Soros and got to know him personally, with Julian Roberts and some of the biggest, and Leon Cooper, some of the biggest names in the investment world back then. And they taught me how to look at these markets. And so when I came back to the United States and I saw the opportunity in cannabis, there was this enormously large scalable market with higher barriers to entry given all the regulations. And so I thought, and one that had large demand in an existing market. And so it met all of my boxes, it checked all the boxes, and I went into it all in.
So when you look ahead now, let's say we're 5 years from now, where would you like the cannabis industry to be?
I would hope that in 5 years, the cannabis industry is mainstream, operating like any other CPG or pharmaceutical business. So, as I said, I think it will split up, working, with safe products regulated by the FDA, where it's capital efficient. It's not treated as some kind of bad schoolboy with the cone on his head in the corner of the classroom. That's what we're hoping for. We'll see whether it gets there. There's still a lot of people in Washington that look a little bit like me, gray-haired and balding, that are skeptical because they spent their life on the war on drugs. Cannabis should never have been part of that war on drugs. It is a healthier product than alcohol, and it is much more medicinal, obviously. And so it doesn't have any of the addiction side effects or the things that you get from some of the, today we promoted in the United States opiates. We pushed opiates on our population, and we made cannabis illegal. And the two are completely uncomparable. So, cannabis is a healing plant. It helps so many people with different conditions, particularly children with epilepsy or people with chronic pain. Whereas these other drugs hooked people up. It created a big, giant cottage industry, whereas cannabis doesn't fall into that category. So I'm really hopeful that that's going to change, and the perception of the plant will change in the United States.
Well, I'm certain it's going to be an interesting 5 years to watch. We'll be watching you as well. I want to thank our guest, Boris Jordan, and we'll look forward to talking to you again. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Make your mark on the future and grow a business powered by our diverse community of problem solvers and boundary breakers. It's time to take your ideas further in a state that works.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. I'm Jason Kelly here in New York. I'm so happy to be with my pal, Cynthia Marshall. She's the CEO of the Dallas Mavericks. I've gotten to know her a bit over the last couple of years, and what a great person to talk about the state of the world. We're going to talk a little basketball. We're going to talk a little bit about how the world gets back to normal. Cint, really good to have you with me.
Hello, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I wish I was, headed to Dallas to see some playoff basketball, though. So, it's a great day to be talking to you. You guys have it all set. I would be committing journalistic delinquency if we didn't start there. Congrats, playoffs upcoming. You're facing the Clippers again. How does this feel like getting back into what feels like a more real postseason?
Yes, it feels great. Everybody's been working really hard. We had some injuries, we had, illnesses, but we did it. We did it. Our guys are pumped up. We're pumped up. I can't wait for the first kind of home playoff game so we can put on a phenomenal experience for our fans. But we are pumped up. It's starting to feel like it ought to feel. It's like, okay, it's been an unusual season, but this part actually feels great. And so we made it to the playoffs again. And not the play-in tournament, but we are in.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to a fellow NBA executive of yours, and I was telling them that I was talking to you, and we were talking about the play-in, and this person said, well, she doesn't have to worry about the play-in; she's in. And so anyway, right. So you're the envy of the league in that regard. So you gave me a great opening.
What was great, Jason? What was great for me is to just I was in this space where I'm watching everybody's games and I'm watching the, who's winning, who's losing. Like we really got into it because of this whole play-in thing. So it was awesome.
Yeah, so tell me about that. I mean, because from a business perspective, I'm fascinated by this whole notion of the play-in. I understand it's good for business in some ways because you had people really caring about the product, candidly, as we got into the latter half of the season and even the last few days of the season. Now you've got some unbelievable matchups, which you don't have to worry about quite yet with this play-in. Tell me about the business side of that while we're talking about it.
Well, it's interesting because for us, it determines exactly what we do. I run the business side, so I lead the business side. So it determines how many games we have to put on, how soon we have to put them on, will we get a break or not, when we can actually put our actual season, our playoff tickets on sale. Do we put play-in tickets on sale? So we were basically kind of at a standstill until we could see exactly where we would totally shake out. But it's exciting because more eyeballs are on it, which is better for us. And, we started to open up our arena. And so it's all good to have people paying attention to what is happening with basketball, even paying attention to the other games because of just how it impacts us. So it's good for the league. It's good for all of us.
Yeah. And so, you mentioned sort of getting the arena ready, getting everything ready, obviously a very different vibe from the bubble. If I were to, and I'm not promising I won't do this, if I were to get on a plane and come to Dallas, what would I see as a fan coming into the arena for the playoffs? What's the experience going to be like, and how's it going to feel different? How's it going to feel the same?
Well, first of all, if you've been to a game recently, you will see at least double the number of people because we've averaged about 4,000 people. Maybe one game we had 4,500. So at least right now we're cleared for 9,000. And as we speak, I am trying to get that number increased. So you'll see more people, which is great. You'll have to do, you get your ticket, on your phone. So you'll have to complete the questionnaire, this health and safety questionnaire. You will still do that. And I'm trying to do something special where we have some special playoff masks because, of course, you have to wear a mask in the arena. And so you're going to see blue everywhere. And then you'll have a great experience. Everything is, it's cash, it's touchless. So, the way we have the concession stand set up and all that. But it's a remarkable experience. You're going to get a vibe. You'll probably see more entertainment than you've seen recently. So it's going to be good. It's going to be good.
And so how do you go about planning something like this? Because as you say, the logistics are a little bit different with the play-in, but the logistics are really different because of COVID. And I wonder what you've learned over the course of this, sort of back to business in a way season where you feel like, all right, well, we tried this, it didn't work, or we are trying this and it's really working. What are some of the learnings, as they say?
Oh my goodness, we've had to really step back, first of all, and just figure out, and it was something that I hadn't thought about at first, is when we decided that we would increase the number of fans and have about 4,500 in the arena, is you have to prioritize all your season ticket members for one thing. We call them Club Maverick members, and figure out who actually gets these seats. How many do they get? And then, how are you going to configure it? And we have where you can have 2, 4, or 6, so the different pods. And then just the math around how do you try to maximize how many people you can actually get in the arena while also being very fair to your season ticket holders. And so I've had season ticket holders call and say, I really wanted 4 seats. I was only offered 2, but I don't see anybody sitting next to me, all that kind of stuff. And so we work with all that. And then just the seating configuration, we have to get approval from the league to make sure that we're following all the health and safety protocols, how many you can have in front of people and all that. So that's been quite interesting. And then, of course, something like a high five line. It's virtual now. You can't have fans standing there, giving the players high fives, but they like that. They want that energy. So we've set it up with the big screens and all that. And so we have a virtual high five line. And what's great about that is you can have the players' families, their babies up on the screen and all that. So that's been great. And just trying to figure it out. The distance that people can, we have to have away from the players. So who can be on the lower level, who can't be on there. In fact, I don't even have red level access. I opted not to do that. I said, no, we got to be safe and healthy. So it's just all of that we just have to work through. And then, of course, there are the financial implications. So we've tried to really step it up with online merchandising. So that has been, Jason, I'm telling you, that has been amazing. What has happened with online merchandising? People are buying our stuff online. I mean, so we still have the city kind of blanketed with Mavs gear, but they're buying most of it online.
And so how do you make those adjustments? I mean, is that more sort of back end? Is that marketing? Like, how do you sort of make those adjustments in real time to make sure that you're kind of getting to the customer, the fan, as it were, where they are?
Well, we have our digital presence, so we kind of really stepped it up around the digital standpoint. And we are actually watching who's watching us. And so we're trying to serve those audiences. So we've increased our youth audience, which I think is amazing. So we're trying to do things to serve them. We're trying to tailor. We are tailoring some merchandise towards them. So we have a whole digital team. We have a content team. We have a marketing team that's amazing. And of course, Aaron Feingold White, our communications and events team. So they're watching all of that. And of course, I'm watching it too, of course. And so we're trying to respond. To your point, we're trying to meet people where they are. And I think we're doing a good job with it. I think we're doing a really good job with it. I mean, our players are really, really popular. And so they've had a good season. And so, one of the things we did when we went into this whole COVID space, we said, we got to figure out a way to keep our players out there, to keep our fans in a place where they can engage with our players. But they can't really touch them right now. They can't see them. So how are we going to do that? So we just put together a plan really almost for every player in the team and just said, let's figure out ways and fun ways to kind of get them out there using a lot of, animation and things that we hadn't done in the past. So we've gotten real creative. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah. So tell me about the conversations you've had with your sponsors. I mean, one of the interesting things about you is you had, this long illustrious career at AT&T there in Dallas. And so you're very plugged into the broader business community. This is a team that is owned by a well-known businessman in Mark Cuban, who's also very engaged in the business community. How do you sort of continue to unlock that? How do you keep sponsors happy in a different sort of economic world? What's the secret there?
Okay, so I probably had more conversations with sponsors and folks than I normally would have, because you got to let them know, and we did, what exactly was going on, especially when we first got into the COVID space where there were 7 games we weren't playing. So you just got to talk to them about, okay, what do you want to do here? It's the same with your season ticket members. I mean, do you want a refund because there's some things that are not going to happen? Do you want to help, work with us and kind of support some of our foundation causes? And because we were doing a lot, as you know, from just a COVID standpoint and responding to community needs, but then also from a social justice standpoint with our Mavs Take Action Plan. So you want to support that? Do you want to just, put your money into next year? And so we have some very, very great sponsors who just said, no, we are with you all for the long haul. I mean, we're with you. So we were very fortunate, knock on wood, that we didn't have too many people asking for refunds. And then we said, okay, here's what our strategy is. And so, because, we had a business plan. We had to adjust our business plan. And then we started letting them know what we're going to do. Digital signage, those kind of things, opportunities to sponsor things that were off the court, and just constant discussions with them. And our sponsors are just terrific. I mean, they're terrific. We just had a virtual Mavs ball. I mean, normally, of course, it's live. This time it was virtual. We raised the same amount of money because people will just step up, and our sponsors are great.
And so what sticks from the way you run your business? I mean, God willing, a year from now when you guys are likely again in the playoffs, you're going to be at full capacity. You're going to have all the right signage. You're going to have all these things. People won't be wearing masks. Again, I'm being optimistic here, but I think somewhat realistic. But there have got to be things that you have discovered along the way and said, well, we're still going to do this, or we're still going to do that. What are some of those things?
Okay, one is just, I think, an intangible, and it really is about just the outlook on life. Okay, people have developed an outlook on life. They have really assessed their lives, and I'm talking about, from an employee standpoint. And so Some people are working in a space right now that works for them. It works for them. It works for their family. It works for them mental health wise. And we're telling our team, you get to still do all of that. So we hope to open up our office in a couple of weeks, kind of reopen, if you will. We have some folks in there, but we're not forcing anybody to come back. We have some fundamental principles we laid out. We'll still communicate on Teams and all that. So we're going to meet people where they live, because people have developed some habits and some things that work for them. By the same token, we have some people who are just dying to get back to work. And we've already said coming back from a mental health standpoint and all that. So I think that's going to stick. Our compassion and our focus on community, communication, all of that, that is going to stick. It's all been good, and we're not going to change that. I think our online merchandising, our whole strategy is kind of shifted. That's going to stick, because that's how people are telling us. A lot of people, that's how they want to do business with us. And so some of the health and safety protocols, they'll still be put in place. I mean, we're still going to have an office set up that's safe and all that. So we'll keep with that. And then I think our increase in digital content, what we've done to just be more creative and reach out to all audiences, we're going to keep doing that. Our virtual high five line, we're going to keep doing that. So what I keep saying is we are not going to throw out the good and the great stuff that some of this bad and ugly stuff caused us to do. We're going to keep that. We're going to keep that. And then there's some things are tossed. They're out, because I'm getting back in the office part-time.
And so tell me about the players, because, you have gone to great lengths, I think, to develop very warm relationships with a lot of your players. They're very popular, as you've said. The owner of the franchise, Mark Cuban, was really one of the first to essentially, I think, and keep me honest here, say, first-class facilities all the way. This is our product in many ways, whether it was refurbishing the locker room, all those sorts of things. This last year has been a very different one for players, and candidly, especially players of color, who are the majority of the players in the NBA. Tell me about how those relationships have changed and what you've seen develop, as someone who, and I know you run the business side, but these are individual businesses in many ways, these players, and they're complicated enterprises.
Oh, you're right. And we do have some great relationships with our players. I love them. We took our team picture on Friday, so it was just good to actually be there with them. And you're right. Like last summer, when the George Floyd situation occurred and all that, that was tough. And actually, it was tough for all of our players. Not just the players of color. It was tough for all of them. And so we got a chance to really get even closer, to really have some courageous conversations, to sit down, just talk about what they were feeling, what they were dealing with, how they were feeling. And then to ask them, what do you want us to do? What do you want to do here? Kind of what's your profile? How do you want to talk about this? So we were right there with them, and we do that for everything. We have a player relations team that's incredible. Greg Nard leads that for us. And so we have personal relationships with them, with their marketing people, with their teams. And so we treat them, they're a team, but we also treat them as individuals. And on our side here, we are here to do whatever they need us to do, taking care of their families. We have great relationships with the family members. I was just out with some of them a couple of weeks ago in our mask, socially distant, but just having some good conversation with some of them just to see how they're doing, especially this time of year. And my boss is very sensitive to that. As you get into the end of the season, playoffs and all that, tensions can get high. So just let's make sure we take care of them and take care of their families. So we have a big focus on that right now. And then some of them have talked to us about kind of what they do, what they want to do around, their different deals. We help them, make, get decisions around that. They have their own, teams and all that, but they can absolutely rely on us. They can rely on us.
Well, tell me about this last year for you. I mean, you alluded to the fact we're coming up on the anniversary of George Floyd's killing in Minneapolis. Obviously, I would imagine, and I know this to be true, you have been involved in a lot of discussions at the league level, in part because of the trailblazer that you are, the first woman of color, the first Black woman to run an NBA team. What has that been like for you? What is the impact you think you've had in some of those conversations in a league that, I think it's fair to say, has been pretty forward-thinking, and yet would be the first to say, still has a long way to go. We all have a long way to go on this. But what are some things you can share about your perspective?
What's actually been great is I've been called upon a lot just for advice, to sit on panels, and I'm one of those kind of people where I don't mind being the Black woman. I mean, I don't mind bringing that perspective. In fact, I will bring that perspective wherever I go. And we all have to do that. You and I talked about that a little earlier, where we all have a role to play. I mean, we all have a role to play in this society. And so I know part of my role is to bring that voice and to make sure that, yes, I'm the first, but to make sure that I'm not the last, and to make sure that not just the league, but others in the corporate spaces are looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion so that we can make more spaces for people that look like me, and to bring those voices and to make things different. I bring a perspective. I have 4 kids, 2 sons, 2 daughters. And so I bring a perspective about, what my sons have had to deal with. And I talk about that. And so our theme here at the Mavs around all that social justice stuff is listen, learn, unite. And so we listen. And so sometimes my voice is called upon and the league is listening, which is great. So I have no hesitation about being called upon and contributing, which is terrific.
The last time you and I got a chance to catch up was toward the tail end of Black History Month. And one of the things you said during that conversation really stuck with me, which was this notion of, all right, we've had a lot of conversations, we've been talking about a lot of stuff, but you through your whole career and certainly in this job have been incredibly action oriented. And I feel like you have a very healthy impatience in that regard and a tendency toward action. What is the action that we should be thinking about, and what are the actions that you talk about either across the league or with other CEOs who are around the Dallas area?
One of the things, and I'm one of the members of the Dallas Regional Chamber, and so we put together a comprehensive diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative for the business community. And so one of the things I talk about is to have a holistic diversity, equity, and inclusion program, not just focused on diversity, the talent, the numbers, and all that, but a real focus around equity. I mean, looking at your customers, looking at your suppliers, your sponsors, looking at where your philanthropic dollars go. What about your purchasing spend? Who are you doing business with? Are you doing business with people that don't look like you? So I talk about making sure that it's holistic and it's focused on every aspect of our business. And that we are, as leaders, we are to be role models, and we are to sit down and engage in those conversations. I mean, some of these conversations are not pleasant, but we need to engage in them. I know we had a few season ticket members when our guys were playing in the bubble and the court says Black Lives Matter, they wanted to leave us. And I said, I want to talk to anybody who wants to leave us because I love our fans. I love them. I love people. And so, Jason, 9 out of 10 times, they end up not leaving us, because we have more in common than differences. It's just talking through some of this and sharing different perspectives about it. And so we focus a lot on that. I tell people, let's have those conversations. Make sure you're having those conversations internally with your people, and make sure you're having those conversations externally. And then make sure you have an action plan. Ours is Mavs Take Action. Advocacy, communication, training, investment, outreach, and noise. 41 initiatives really focused on getting rid of some of these racial disparities. And so have a documented action plan. Just pick one thing. Pick one area, whether it's education, whether it's economic, whether it's investing in communities, whether it's making sure that you're trying to diversify your executive team, your pipeline, whatever it is. Pick one thing and get with your team and say, hey, let's get this done. And then the next year you pick one more thing, but be very, very deliberate about it. I call it all in leadership. Okay. You got to be intentional. You have to be inclusive. You've got to inspire people to want to do it. So you just got to get all in with it.
And so, when you took this job, it was a challenging one to say the least. There was a great Businessweek cover story. We are here under the auspices of Businessweek that got into that, and the reasons in many ways that you specifically were tapped to do this job, to really help fix a franchise in many ways that Mark and others had identified, needed some help. Where are you in that process, and what are your big priorities? What are the one or two things that you're especially focused on with the organization as we get deeper into 21?
You're right. We had a big focus on diversity and inclusion, and we have made so much progress, and I'm so proud of our team. Last year, we actually won the NBA's Inclusion Leadership Award. So I feel real good about the culture that we've established and our values and all that. Equity is a big piece that we're focused on now. Looking at all of our processes, especially as we come back to work, making sure that they are fair. Especially in the environment that we're in right now, making sure we are meeting people where they live, and that people are having a great personal experience being a Mavs employee. Our workplace promise is if you work at the Mavs, you are in a place where every voice matters and everybody belongs. And that's everybody. I recently had a meeting with all of our Asian American Pacific Islander employees because of what's happening in some parts of the country there. So making sure that we are seeing about everybody. That's a big focus for us right now. And continuing to elevate women and kind of preaching that gospel, making sure that we're just not doing it, but that we are a leader. Right now, we are really kind of stepping up to our external role. We are natural conveners. People trust us. And so we are taking the leadership in the community on really advancing a holistic DE&I agenda, which is great. And that's all of us. All of our employees, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, we're all in there together pushing an agenda for Dallas. And so that's our big focus right now is how can we lead these kinds of efforts in Dallas? How can we help to bring Dallas back from a business standpoint? So we're doing a lot of work focusing in on small businesses and how we can help bring the business community back. So we're looking outside of ourselves.
Well, and that looking outside of yourself is so interesting to me. And this is another issue you and I have talked a lot about as we think about the last year. And, you guys were among the teams that offered your facilities as a voting site. This was a time where sports and athletes did step outside themselves in some ways uncomfortably and into a world that is very partisan, in a world that, does have people canceling season tickets or at least threatening to do so. How do you maintain that balance of a very diverse fan base, but also wanting to do the right thing? Like, what's the North Star there that you would advise other CEOs who were wrestling with these exact same issues?
One of the things that we did when I came to the Mavs, we put together something called DMAC, Dallas Mavericks Advisory Council, and it's about 30 people from the community, other business leaders, from academia, just all parts of the community, and all demographics, just everything. And these people actually help us make decisions. So we, when big issues come up, I'll convene DMAC along with our folks, our employee resource groups, and we talk through our action plans because you always want to keep that balance. You have to keep the balance. How do we do what's right for everybody? And sometimes you won't make everybody happy, but at least you have looked at it from everybody's perspective. And so our external advisory council really helps us a lot. And as you said, we have a bias for action. And so we kind of identify what the issue is. We talk through it. We have our courageous conversations. In fact, we hope to make it an annual thing. So we're already talking about having one maybe in the July, August timeframe. And so we're canvassing these folks to say, okay, what topics? What are the big topics in our community? I know education is one of them. And so what are we going to talk about? And so really going outside yourselves and having other people in there to help you make those decisions is something that we try to do a lot.
Well, it's been really fun talking to you. I mean, I'm sort of imagining what's going to unfurl over the next couple of weeks, not the least of which is arguably two of the most interesting and, shall we say, excitable owners in the entire NBA, Steve Ballmer and your own Mark Cuban, squaring off once again. NBA, it's here. It's the playoffs. Life seems to be getting back to normal here, Cint.
It's so exciting, and I love both of those guys. I mean, I love both of them. So it is just going to be great to just see everybody, just see the teamwork that exists, and not just on our team, but all of the teams coming together, all of the owners coming together, my colleagues, it's exciting. It's exciting. I'm so glad that somehow I fell into this, which is beautiful. And so it's a 2.0 for me, and I'm having a ball. This actually feels almost normal.
All right. Well, your excitement, as always, is infectious. Always good to talk to you. Hope to see you in person before too long. Go Mavs. And
you too. Go Mavs. Come to Dallas. You're going to have a great experience. Come see us.
All right. Thanks, Cent.
Bye.
Hi, I'm David. I'm the CEO of Nugget.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm the Chief Creative Officer at Nugget.
I'm Ryan, and I'm the CMO. Nugget came about as a response to the clunky futons that we had in college. They didn't work well. They broke. They weren't comfortable. You couldn't take them from one place to another. Everything was wrong with them, and I traced all that stuff back to the fact that they were connected, they were attached pieces of furniture. So I thought, conceptually, what is an unattached piece of furniture?
I asked for one of the Nugget couches for my classroom. I was a Title I school teacher, and I really had no money to afford anything for my classroom. So they gifted me one, and I just recognized as soon as it was in the classroom that it was absolutely something for kids. My kids were obsessed with it. It changed my classroom culture, and we were able to use it in so many fun, unique ways because it's such a versatile product. And so for me, that was kind of the moment where I was like, okay, we really need to get this into more classrooms, daycares, playrooms, homes. We had donated a large amount of our foam and fabric to a local reuse facility scrap exchange. And I had gone there for fabric research just to pick up some scraps for future colors. And there was a line around the building of moms who were putting the foam into the fabric and saying, oh my gosh, we're able to get a Nugget for $10. And it was, for me, it was that moment where I was like, oh my gosh, people are obsessed with this thing.
I think last year really allowed us to lean into what makes us different as a company, because being a company that is still a small team out of North Carolina and doesn't have any investors, isn't like VC backed, like we just are a very small kind of family operation. And so last year was a time where you needed tons of communication with customers. You needed to put updates out there and let people know, how are we handling this? How are we doing this with our team? And I think we are really well positioned to do that. And I think we showed something from our brand that you weren't getting from a lot of other companies in a time when there's a lot of like uncertainties.
It didn't change the way we were thinking about it, but it definitely like allowed us to capture the imaginations of a larger audience.
I think that any other company that's entering our space has seen what we're doing in play furniture. They can copy what we've done, but they can't copy the DNA that led us to get to those places. I mean, we've just had a different approach from the beginning. We've been a very different company. We've been very slow at how we've done things and very meticulous. And, you know, we need to speed up now as we've seen how much excitement there is for what we're doing. But we're going to balance that always with what we've been from the start.
We're only going to make things that deserve to be made, things that are nuggety, things that like do something better and really combine like toy and furniture in a way that is new and thoughtful. Now we are in this 100,000 square foot facility. It's a couple football fields big, making a lot of nuggets, putting a lot of smiles on kids' faces. It's very lucky. You know, we're satisfied, we're fulfilled, we're having a good time and working hard doing it.
All right, so thinking that the Nugget, first of all, it would be a great place to read the Businessweek.
Absolutely.
I'm just thinking.
Tons of different positions, all of them comfortable.
Exactly. Listen, it has been an incredible day. What do you think of the first day of this?
I mean, there's so many things to pick from. I mean, the fact that Nugget video is actually like the PG version of it, I encourage you to like do a little bit more.
I was saying, where are the adults talking about these?
There's a few other things that they're used for, but you know, the Jay Leno thing on classic cars was phenomenal. The Scott Kirby of United talking about travel coming back. Boris, Jordan, Cynthia Marshall. I mean, these are just great guests. I've loved the program so far.
Listen, it was all about business, right? And you guys really covered it from so many different aspects. You mentioned Jay Leno. I have to say, I love that piece.
Yeah, what was your favorite takeaway today?
Well, listen, you know, we're a business network. Businessweek, you know, also covers just business from so many different angles. Autos, cars, they're great collectibles. You can make a lot of money. He talked about a 1962 Maserati, picked it up for something like $25,000.
Just pocket change.
Right.
Know?
Well, exactly. A little engine, a little transmission work, it's worth about $300,000, he thinks.
Yeah.
So talk about an investment.
Yeah.
What stood out for you?
I love the United interview that Brooke Sutherland did. I thought it was fascinating. And Scott Kirby, 7 kids and going on vacation to Croatia with them. It's like single-handedly is going to like give the Croatian GDP a boost. I love that.
Exactly. I had no idea. I'm one of 7 kids, so that really resonated with me. What's interesting too, Joel, you know, he talked about the hard business, you know, their leisure, their business, their long haul. But he reminded us that, you know, leisure travel has come back in a big way, but that business travel is going to take a little bit longer.
Yeah, that's right. But yet, once you're out there doing it, it feels like, oh, this is something that I've been missing too. So.
Talking about being out there and doing it, Curaleaf. He's such a great voice for the industry.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and it's one that I think we've all been watching forever. And it looks like it's sort of on the cusp of yet another breakthrough. So we'll see where 2021 goes from here.
I know, he's really, really hopeful. We're also really hopeful for getting back to sports. And Cynthia Marshall, first of all, she's got such great energy. Jason Kelly catching up with her. They're moving forward and things are opening up.
I know, I can't wait to go watch some basketball. Like, that is on my list.
Or you know what I can't wait for?
What?
Can we talk about the cover?
I mean, maybe. I mean, we have to. I mean, it's, you know, it is the cover of the issue. Yeah, there was some competition. And, you know, I tried to stuff the ballot box as much as I could. So we'll see what happens. Right?
Well, listen, I love what you guys said about, I think they kind of called you out about scaffolding with the words.
I mean, so many insults. I went away just seething, so we'll have to talk about it afterwards. But, you know, it was a jump ball. We'll see what happened.
Wait for review time. So let's talk about, can we talk about the winner?
We can talk about it. So after pulling together the results,
the
winner is...
Drum roll.
Not me. Not the edit team.
I'm so sorry.
It's the art team.
Listen, they're artists. I mean...
I will have to say that week in, week out, our art department just blows me away. And so it's only fitting that, you know, they walk away with the trophy this time.
Well,
because they kind of do it every time. You know, I give them ideas, but they usually are a little silent and polite about it, and then, you know, come up with the winning idea.
Is it one of those? That's nice, Joel. But let me tell you, I have to say, when these covers come out, we are all showing them in the newsroom. Like, we just love them. They're often very visual, a lot of color. Sometimes they're very simple. Sometimes there's a lot going on. But
we take a lot of pride in them, and it's just an honor to see them at work. And this is one of those, I feel like it's already like an iconic cover. So, and we've talked about it with all of you, and you got to help select this one, and that's the best part. We've never done that before.
Can I ask you, are you ever decided on the cover this early in the week?
This is a little on the early side for us, and, you know, I get to sleep well tonight. Like, if I don't know what my cover is going into Tuesday, it's always like a little restless sleep. So
yeah, I know.
Sleep like a baby tonight.
And sometimes there's some last-minute changes. Not this week, though.
No, we're good.
All right, so we're going to wrap up the first day. What a week it's going to be. What a day it's already been. So thank you so much for joining us for day 1 of the Bloomberg Businessweek. We hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to all of today's speakers. And we do want to also thank all of our sponsors, our solution sponsor, Deloitte, our presenting sponsor, InterSystems, and then our supporting sponsor, Indiana Economic Development Corporation, for making this virtual event possible. If you'd like more information from our sponsors, please visit the resources tab on your screen. We couldn't do it without them.
And most of all, thank you to all of you for being such an engaged audience. Remember, we are back tomorrow, Tuesday, where we'll be focused on tech and transformation. The hashtag is #TheBusinessWeek. Please engage with us, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me for the editor's overtime session that starts at 12:10 p.m. Eastern Time, featuring Bloomberg Businessweek Assistant Managing Editor Jim Ellis and Bloomberg Intelligence's George Ferguson. We'll answer your questions live and discuss the future of the travel industry post-COVID.
Have a great day, everyone.
Hello, I'm Steve Hatfield, Deloitte's Global Future of Work leader. Welcome to this Bloomberg Businessweek Editor's Overtime session. In 2020, the future of work proved itself with real companies and real workers in real time. There was wide adoption of digital platforms, workers learned new skills to thrive in the uncertainty, and leaders found that remote working could be more effective and productive than they'd ever imagined. In short, the future showed up and got to work. And that has leaders everywhere thinking in new ways and exploring new strategies to thrive in this future. At Deloitte, we talk about the future of work through three dimensions: the work, the workforce, and the workplace. While some aspects of this accelerated future of work that we've seen this last year has been positive, not everyone has thrived. Now is the time for organizations to step back and consider, is the future of work we've seen over the past year the future of work we want to see over the next decade? We believe we can do better. It means putting humans at the center of this new future of work. It starts with thinking about work differently. In our current work environments, we've added tools and technology to the ecosystem, but we've let the technology drive what work gets done and how, and failed to deliver the differentiated value that designing work with humans in the center can create. We need to flip it and re-architect work itself and how we deploy technology to enable work that drives real value and human connection. With work at the center, we're moving from process to outcomes, from static work to dynamic flow, from tasks to capabilities, and from efficiency and cost to value and meaning. Ultimately, putting work at the center lets us focus on the art of the possible for what we can achieve when technologies enable and elevate humans. Redesigning a more human future of work is also about unleashing the workforce. The present-day talent management approach is being disrupted. The future is about unleashing human potential through workforce ecosystems. It's about accessing the capabilities and deploying workers when and where you need them, curating experiences that develop workers, unleash their potential, and in effect, grow the collective intelligence of your organization. And by engaging the workforce, enrolling them in your purpose and mission, and motivating them via the impact they're having. Lastly, redesigning a more human future of work is about building adaptive and flexible workplaces. We cannot underestimate the organizational and cultural shifts that are demanded in this expanded work environment. It now includes ecosystems of physical and virtual workplaces, and the expectations around how we collaborate, how we engage, and relate to each other in this new way of working. We've been talking about the future of work for over a decade. This past year has shown us that it's here. There's never been a better time for you as leaders to consider the choices you will face when the constraints come off. Where do you want to go? How quickly? And are you prepared to get there? We invite you to take a look and challenge some of the orthodoxies that you've brought to the table around work, workforce, and workplace through some of our research. You can find that at Deloitte.com/future of work. So with that, thank you, everybody, and enjoy your conference.
Welcome back. I'm Joel Weber, the editor of Bloomberg Businessweek. I'm with Jim Ellis. Jim, great to be here with you. Welcome to Editors Overtime, where we take our ties off. Oh, one of us does. All right, then. So we'll keep it a little casual. But Jim, I wanted to talk to you about, we're going to talk to George Ferguson at Bloomberg Intelligence, or you're going to talk to him about travel and tourism. On the Businessweek staff, you are known as someone who excels at vacations and travel.
The cruise meister.
The cruise meister. And I'm wondering how you're looking at travel on a personal level. Like, where's the first place you're going to go when you're able to?
Well, probably the first place we're going to go is Spain.
Okay.
Because it's going to hopefully be open first. We canceled a trip last year to Spain, and I love it. It's great. The problem is that it's so tourist dependent that I'm worried that they may reopen a little bit too fast.
And pro tip, where are you thinking about going in Spain?
Well, we normally go not to the Costa del Sol or we go to Barcelona, and you go to the towns directly south of Barcelona, like Sitges. And it's nice. It's not as warm, but it's also not packed with tourists.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope that you get to go enjoy yourself on some beaches soon. So just thinking about what you do in the magazine, a lot of business industry coverage. What are some things that I should be looking out for that are going to come from you, you think, in the weeks and months to come?
I think one of the biggest stories in the next few weeks, or definitely the next few months, is going to be the whole return to work thing. It's people are excited about the pandemic ending, but they also are maybe not thinking about all the problems that are going to come up with bringing people back to offices. I mean, there's still going to be issues about distancing. There's still issues about vaccinations, about whether employers can actually force people to come back to work. I mean, right now we've seen a lot of the carrot. Oh, there's great things, better food, sort of help with transportation, maybe some, being sensitive about your ability to go back and forth. But I think we're going to get a lot more stick as the the year progresses.
As the summer ends?
Oh, yeah. The summer is over, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, school's in, back to business.
Right. That school question is, I think, a big one.
Oh, yeah, it's large.
Whatever the school policies are will kind of determine what the fall looks like.
Yeah, we're also going to have a lot of companies that did very well during the pandemic. You sort of forget that some companies did very well then because of, delivery companies, companies that, up until recently, people like Peloton, things that were sort of home-centered, those were all you could do. It's going to be a real test now to see if those kinds of businesses can continue.
Well, tied to that, I think, is what's been happening in the markets with the tech sell-off. Obviously, the tech sell-off has been sort of the thing that in the markets we've all been watching. And I'm wondering, as you look at that and see what could happen for a bunch of other businesses that have maybe missed out on some of the pandemic winning moments.
Right. Like, a lot of people sort of thought about things that were sort of home-centered, things that were, sort of tech-centered. And I think now we're going to get more back into things that were sort of cyclical, things that were sort of in some ways boring. But they're the majority of American business. We're going to go back to worrying about autos. We're going to go back to worrying about consumer goods and consumer clothing, things that you didn't need in the age of sweatpants, which is 2020. Right. But all of a sudden, fashion comes back. Dressing for work, dressing better comes back. And I think that what we saw last year, particularly with retail, mall-based retail, things like that, there's actually going to be life for that later.
Right. Well, I think another thing that people are going to be really interested in, and it's something that we touched on in the current issue of the magazine, is the inflation question, right? And how much that pinches consumers. What are you looking for on the inflation front, since a lot of the companies you're talking about are going to be sensitive to that?
We're going to look a lot at sort of what's going on with commodity prices that basically are the materials that lots of companies use. I mean, we've talked a lot about shortages of materials, but also the pricing of materials is going to go up. And whether it's related or not, we're going to see a lot of people pointing fingers at higher wages, saying, oh, well, that's what's behind this. But it's also just going to be such a dramatic increase in activity that it's going to have to push certain prices up. Right. And how we deal with that at a time when the Fed really doesn't want that to happen, that's going to be a real story.
Right. That the Fed being a thing that we're all super focused on watching here at Bloomberg, obviously. And the other element that I thought was really interesting in the current issue in that inflation package was that idea about China, right? And China's, as the raw materials prices for raw materials rise for China, that ends up getting passed along to consumers around the world because China's exporting everything, right?
Right. I mean, basically they're going to export inflation the same way that they've exported all sorts of goods for many years. And I don't know if a lot of countries are going to be ready for that. At least they're not going to be ready for it right now. And I think we've all gotten a little spoiled in the last few years in a period where interest rates have been held way down, artificially held down. Yeah. And even though we are sort of shocked by this, we're talking about maybe a slow return to normal. Normal is sort of scary if you've had what we've had for the last 5 years. It has been a time when money has been unusually cheap, and to be a business person, it was a great thing.
Yeah, right. Well, lots to talk about, including between you and George Ferguson, who's going to be joining us, George, with Bloomberg Intelligence. I'll let you guys take it from here and talk about some tourism and travel topics.
We're ready.
Take it away.
Okay. There he is. Hello, George.
Hey, Jim. How are you today?
Oh, hanging in there. I'm glad you're here. And one of the reasons I'm so glad is, as you know, I enjoy travel, but also, travel, transportation, airlines, aerospace. It's a big industry, or a number of large industries, and it's a big piece of, sort of the return. I don't know what we call it, the return to normalcy, sort of that we're looking forward to for the next year. But it also brings with it a lot of challenges, and that's what I'm hoping that we can talk a bit about today. I know that this is sort of a big thing for you. Where George is the senior airlines and aerospace analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence, but he's also had a very varied background. I mean, he's worked in as banker, he's worked as an analyst, he's an MBA. He's the smart guy of this pairing here, and he's the guy that I'm hoping to sort of let us know what to expect, and also what are some of the hurdles that are going to be things that investors and our readers are going to be looking at.
And I'll also add that we get to have the audience ask questions, both of you and George. So remember to, in the right-hand corner of your screen, to type any questions in that you would like our esteemed panel to answer for you.
Okay, George, I wanted to start off by just sort of a scene setter. What we saw in 2020 were basically travel sort of almost completely stopped. At least I should say international travel, definitely at the beginning of the pandemic, sort of stopped. And, we were seeing, for some airlines, traffic dropping 90, 95% on the international carriers, the big, network carriers, 97% in Asia. I mean, now, have we ever seen anything quite like the trauma that we had in 2020?
I don't think ever. I mean, in my career as a banker, as an analyst, I've just never seen the declines in revenue, the declines in traffic for any industry I've ever covered. I think this is just absolutely unprecedented. So it's been very, very rough year for airlines. 2020 was a very, very rough year for airlines and aircraft manufacturers.
A lot of people thought that, okay, we go through this period and, 2021, things are going to start moving back to normal. And it's going to be this sort of oh happy day scenario. But I think that we're already seeing with the sort of difficult nature of getting the pandemic under control on a global basis, that we're going to end up with, sort of pockets of places where we've got recovery and pockets of places where we're still looking a long way away from normal. How does that, sort of affect let's say, the airline industry? I would assume that, that's going to be very difficult for people who are sort of focused on international, and maybe a positive for people who are focused on sort of domestic travel.
Absolutely. So the way we're seeing it, really, I think for airlines that are more domestic focused, don't have to cross borders for lots of their destinations, and are delivering seats at the lowest cost. So, ultra low cost carriers and low cost carriers, we think their business is going to be best this summer. And if you're international focused or if you're business focused, you're going to have the biggest challenge this summer. You're actually going to probably need to morph into a company that can deliver seats to those leisure flyers. Because as you said, earlier in the segment, we're not back to the office yet. So business travel really hasn't been reintroduced yet. There's a little bit of it going on. As we get into the fall and the winter, I think you'll get more of that. And international is slow because you always need the coordination with other countries. And there's countries like China that really don't, they don't seem ready to open yet. That 95% down the level of capacity going in there. And in Europe, we're kind of waiting for the Europeans to come up the curve in vaccinations and think about how to bring us Americans over there again and them here again. We even heard the CEO of Ryanair say he thought it was going to be 2022, and that's what we've been saying before a lot of us get back to Europe from the U.S. That's a really important international travel market. So right now, the people going hammers and tongs are the ones that are delivering, bringing Americans to their favorite domestic or near international, Mexico, Caribbean type of vacation destinations. Those are the people that are really going to see a great summer.
Now, you said that pricing is going to be a really, really big thing for consumers, for the rest of this year. That's never a good. It's a good thing for consumers, but probably never a good thing for an airline, particularly when they don't have the business travel at the front of the plane to give them those high margin tickets up there to allow them to discount in the back. Does this mean that sort of carriers like Allegiant and Spirit and Frontier, those that have positioned themselves as more sort of, for the price conscious traveler, that this is their moment in the sun?
Yeah, absolutely. So sorry, I should have said that more distinctly, but yeah, the ultra low cost carriers, Spirit, Frontier, Allegiant, I think really they're going to see the best, going to see a nice summer, and they can deliver seat miles cheaper, so they can get closer to break even or even past break even. We think some of them will make cash this summer on that discount traveler. I was looking at the latest numbers for April, where we're seeing we get a data set from Airline Reporting Corporation. We're seeing that filter in from April now, and what I noticed is online travel agencies, they're back to 90% of the transactions that they were doing in April 2019. 90%. So they're the book, and that's typically a very price sensitive booking. Physical travel agencies that are leisure focused, they're still just below 40%. Business around 30%. So even there, you see that the trend really is that online travel agency person, the customer, that really price sensitive customer, they're the ones coming back in force right now.
Now that does that business go to is that business headed toward the sort of traditional leisure destinations like a Florida or a Vegas, or simply because people can't go to places like Europe because of travel restrictions? Or does this broaden out where domestic U.S. travelers are headed this year?
So, I mean, it really sort of channels where domestic U.S. travelers are going this year. From everything we're seeing, customers, flyers are still looking for those leisure destinations with good outdoor activities. And I think that ends up channeling a lot of the airlines, right? And so they're trying to pick you up in your hometown or as close as your hometown as you can get. Sometimes Frontier and Allegiant do a slightly better job of that, or Spirit, because they get into those smaller airports and they're trying to get you to your favorite national park or your beach or Mexico beach vacations. But it means that everybody's flying similar places, and that keeps prices under wraps too, because there's a lot of competition. And whatever capacity they had that was focused on international, they're bringing it back into domestic or back into close international. And that's increasing the competition too. When we looked at that April data today, we saw the price of a domestic fare rose, but it was still $100 less. It was like $370 or something in 2019. It's like $270 now. It's $100 less than in 2019. So you can still see there's just a lot of capacity that has to be absorbed before fares go up again.
Now, what does that mean for the large network carriers that might have been more dependent on business travel and sort of catering to the type of traveler who would come up and, would plunk down an $800, $900 ticket to go someplace for a meeting, and now there are no meetings, or there are fewer meetings and fewer business travelers? What happens to those guys whose networks were built around a higher paying customer?
Yeah, so they're really trying to turn into leisure carriers for this year, right? And I think you're going to see some slim down service a little bit, just trying to keep costs down. They may call it a little bit COVID related, service, and they're flying to those same destinations. I talked to some pilots at the main lines who say they're landing in cities they've never landed in before, and there's Allegiant airplanes around, at the gates. So they're trying to morph into those, those vacation carrying airlines. And look, what does it mean for them? It means that the summer's going to be a bit of a cash burn summer for them. I mean, it's good for them, right? They want the fares, they want to fill the airplanes, they need the cash, but they're not. It's going to be really hard breaking even on this kind of business, and they're just trying to buy time until the fall as they get that business traveler coming back and that international traveler coming back, where they can start to improve margins. They're all sitting on a lot of cash, so right now we're not concerned at all that any of them are going to fail.
Well, in the U.S., we have had a very successful, on a relative basis, very successful campaign to vaccinate the public. It's less so in many parts of the world. And I know that Europe, which depends on a heavy, sort of summer travel business, particularly for leisure travelers, has, not done as well with that, with restrictions, but crossing borders. And so the summer has become more uncertain. Is it going to be a good summer travel season for airlines in Europe this summer?
So, the way we see sort of the vaccination rollout and the restriction lifting in Europe, we really think that there's going to be a later European summer. So we think that it's maybe more late 3Q focused as the Europeans come up the curve in vaccinations, drop some of those restrictions. It's again going to be a very intra-European, short haul flights, kind of short to medium 3 to 4 hours, summer for them. In the U.S., it's starting even earlier because we're further down the road on vaccines. But again, so I think the Europeans will get one, but it's just going to be a little bit later than ours.
Is the sort of sluggish or possibly sluggish return, particularly of a lot of international travel, what does that mean for the actual airframe manufacturers like Boeing and Airbus?
Yeah, so I mean, right now what we've seen, the majority of deliveries always are the narrow bodies, the workhorses of worldwide fleets, the A320 from Airbus and the Boeing 737. And that's really going to continue as we go through this year into next year. I mean, we would never expect the wide bodies to surpass them, but wide bodies, which are the long haul airplanes, the twin aisle airplanes, have been particularly hurt. There's a number of wide bodies that just won't be coming back after this pandemic, as a lot of people put press to things like the A380, the Boeing 747. The bigger wide bodies really are going to have a hard time coming out of this pandemic. Even the 777, which Boeing will retain, which will be the largest airplane in their lineup, that will make it through the pandemic, but build rates will be very, very low, a couple a month, and they're just not going to see a lot of demand from orders. And again, what's really going to drive profits, revenue at those companies, cash flow at those companies, are the Airbus A320 and Boeing 737. Airbus doing a much better job sort of coming through the pandemic because they didn't have problems with their airplanes coming into the pandemic. They didn't have the grounding and the electrical problems that the 737 had. They're delivering 30 some a month. They want to go to mid 40s by the end of the year. We think that looks a bit aggressive. There's a lot of parked airplanes in the world. There's 20% of global fleets are still parked. So of global narrow body fleets. So we think that the airlines can still go back and get some of those airplanes and put them into service and won't necessarily want to retire them. Boeing having a much harder time sort of getting out of the blocks this year. They're sitting on an inventory of a lot of 737s already built and couldn't be delivered due to the problems with their MCAS system and now the electrical systems. Ryanair was on TV today, sort of complaining about this. They want airplanes and can't get them. And you hate to hear those stories during a pandemic because Boeing really would love to be delivering. But by year end, I think they're really driving to make about 31 of those a year. And look, that 737 and that A320, they can really drive profits and cash flow at those companies. They are the driver of profits and cash flow. So as they get into those 30s and 40s, that'll put them in good shape from a profitability standpoint. But they'd love to see those wide bodies selling more and delivering more of them. And they want to raise that narrow body rate to keep profits and cash flow.
Now, we had a question from one of our viewers that sort of trails into this, which is, how is the airline industry impacted by all those layoffs that occurred at the start of the COVID pandemic? And now, are there enough people rejoining and willing to work on the airlines to actually meet the demand that carriers are going to be seeing in the next few months?
Yeah, so far we're not hearing from the airlines any concerns about the workforce from sort of a hiring standpoint. Remember that some of the initial government stimulus actually paid for salaries and has been paying for salaries at airlines, so they couldn't lay off people. So the airlines have come through the pandemic almost, not quite a full complement, but almost a full complement. They did lay some people off, not lay, they gave them early retirements and things, but it had to be voluntary. So I think that their labor situation will be good coming through the pandemic. Not that it won't have spottiness where there's some problems, but we still look at a very large number of pilots that are going to retire at these airlines over the next decade, and we still think there's going to be a need for pilots. So pilots still probably have a little bit of bargaining capability, and there's still a need. So it's not like they're out of the woods, but I think coming through the pandemic immediately after it, they'll be in okay shape.
Okay. Well, let's stay on that, because we've for years now heard about the looming pilot shortage, and yet we're going to run out of pilots, particularly in the developing world, where airlines are growing very fast, or at least were growing very fast in Asia, China, India. And does what's happened over the past year, does that sort of just push that forward? I should say push it out, that basically we're still going to end up needing to have all those people flying planes, but maybe it's pushed out a year or two?
Yeah, I think it's delayed some of the acute challenges of that, right? But essentially what we had is, we weren't training enough pilots globally. And then as the developing world expanded and flying expanded, it sort of pulled some of those pilots out of the developed world where they were flying into the developing world, and sort of creating a general need for pilots around the world. And it was getting to the point where airlines, I think, were really having to think about how they were going to train pilots, through the company. Sort of tradition has been you train yourself in the U.S., and meaning you pay for your own training. And in other parts of the world, there's ab initio, where the airline itself will train the pilot and bring them through the ranks. But I think airlines in the U.S. had to start thinking about how they were going to train pilots, because there was going to be a shortage. And like you said, I think we've pushed it back, but I think that the bull thesis is still there on air travel, and that is the more people make, the more air travel they typically consume. And as the developing world increases salaries and gets on airplanes, that's where we saw the growth in deliveries out of Boeing and Airbus. You got to put 2 pilots in every cockpit for one flight. A lot of them need 5 crews for every airplane they buy. So the multiplier effects get quite big. And I think that it means in a couple of years, you'll be back to trying to figure out how to get enough pilots again.
Okay. Now, another of our viewers has asked that, we didn't travel a lot during the pandemic. A lot of people didn't travel at all. So they were wondering whether some of the changes that we've seen within, things like seating and things like that will be long-term changes that the airlines will keep in place, or, will we go back to normal? That, obviously the middle seat, sort of empty middle seat, has gone the way of the dodo already. But are there going to be, will there be anything that was changed during the pandemic that will stick around?
Well, so what we really saw for airlines during the pandemic with seats was that whatever you were doing on seats, you stopped immediately when the pandemic hit, because the minute airlines stopped getting cash, they don't make any of those types of changes. But prior to the pandemic, everything was going to more and more seats in the airplane, less and less personal space. And I suspect you'll see that trend continue when we get through the pandemic. The airlines will have to generate cash. It helps alleviate some of the challenges of finding enough pilots. The more people you put in an airplane and the larger the airplane that you buy, that helps alleviate some of those pilot issues. And obviously, the more people you put in the airplane, the more profit you can make. And I think that coming through the pandemic, you'll start to see more of that again. But right now, it's all on hold. And right now, I think all the airlines, if you were looking at a business class seat refresh, business class seats cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, quite expensive. A lot of that's on hold. There were some that didn't put it all on hold. I think they're going to wait and look for that rebound in business travel, which we kind of think is going to take till mid-decade. There'll be a bit of a lag in that. So you may see some slowdown in business class refreshes.
I mean, there's been a lot of attention, obviously, on what's going on in India right now with the pandemic. But India, and there's a health crisis there, but hopefully it will be alleviated someday soon. India had been one of the fastest growing airline markets. And, is that going to still be one of the big growth areas when you look out, the same way that China has been such a dramatic growth area for the aerospace business?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, right? We're watching India very closely for a number of reasons, and definitely sort of the pandemic rearing its head there again so intensely concerns us about other markets. We think vaccines sort of fix that problem. But when you get past the pandemic, it's, I forget the latest count, 1.4 billion people, right? The infrastructure in India, there's some challenges on surface transportation infrastructure in India. I know firsthand from having traveled the country, and so aviation fixes some of those problems, really connects the country, and as that wealth rises, we think that India will be another place, a great place to be selling airplanes into. So yes, I think it does return after the pandemic in importance.
A quick question for long haul business travel. If you were a betting man, how many years before you think we'll get back to where we were in 2019?
Yeah, so again, we think kind of mid-decade. We think companies saved a bunch of money here during the pandemic, not flying. They all love Microsoft Teams and Google, whatever. They all like this video conferencing software. We don't think it replaces person-to-person contact. It'll take a little time to get us comfortable, but we think by mid-decade that we're not a believer that business travel is done. You'll be back to 2019 levels by mid-decade, we think.
Okay, well, now that you've let all our viewers know that they might as well get their passports renewed, I want to thank you for being with us again. George Ferguson from Bloomberg Intelligence, happy travels.
Yeah, thank you. Enjoyed it.
Bye now.